Chapter 510. Since there were people who wanted them to die, in order to survive, they had no choice but to sacrifice themselves. Even though it seemed a little inappropriate to say these words, the truth was as such. The Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to live and surrender surrounded Huang Hua and his bodyguards. Then, someone stabbed the first sword. After a series of clashing sounds, Huang Hua died in battle. His body was thrown to the city stairs, and a white flag was hung high. The fall of Jiaoji's eastern city gate tower was completely out of Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's expectations. When he heard the news in the palace, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. He stood there motionless for a long time. Crown Prince, are you all right, Your Highness?" Several young civil and military officials walked up to Li Yuanlong with anxious and concerned expressions on their faces. There were also some older ministers who shook their heads and quickly ran towards the depths of the palace. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who was shaken, finally recovered after a few breaths. The first thing he said was, Fight back. We must take back the East Gate Tower and chase those mercenaries out of Hanoi City." "Crown Prince, don't worry. Someone is already doing that. Not only that, we are also preparing to send the 10 iron carriages that we just built." General Li Xiaozhong comforted him. He was also preparing to go to the front lines to see if they could take back the East Gate. Good. Hearing Li Xiaozhong's arrangement, Li Yuanlong's expression became much better. His nervous mood seemed to have been relieved. Just as he was thinking about what to do next, footsteps suddenly came from the depths of the palace behind him. Then a male duck's voice sounded. "The king has arrived." "Greetings, Your Majesty." All the officials, including Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, immediately knelt on the ground. Humph! What answered them was a cold and unhappy voice. Then King Li was helped to sit on the golden chair in the palace hall. Li was indeed very old. In history, he should have been dead by now. But because of Yang Qindong's arrival, he was still alive. Apart from looking a little older, he was still in good spirits. At least, his face was glowing much better than those officials who had been affected by the chaos and whose faces had turned pale. Sitting on the golden throne, Li's gaze was like a tiger king inspecting his territory. First, he looked around. Many officials and generals who were stared at by him couldn't help but lower their heads. Seemingly satisfied with the result, Li looked at Li Yuanlong again and shook his head. "Crown Prince, why do you only want to fight them head-on? Could it be that you think that the other party would retreat after killing their way through the city gates? You've really disappointed Father. This child is slow-witted. Father, please enlighten me." Li Yuanlong really didn't know what to say. The situation was messed up by him, and he indeed had an unavoidable responsibility. This was a heavy blow to his prestige as the crown prince. In the past, because Li Yuanlong was calm and generous, he had united many important officials and generals. Sometimes, King Li had to worry about his feelings when giving orders. There were even some who said in private that the king was getting old and should consider abdicating the throne. The Jiaoji kingdom only had a young king to lead it to glory. These voices were the loudest in Jiuzhen Prefecture, where the crown prince was. After all, the crown prince was there. Some local officials thought that the king was far away, and very few people cared about the old king, Li. If this continued, it would not be good for the Jiaoji kingdom. It was even possible that there would be an all-out war. King Li had his own information network, so he naturally knew a lot about this. He didn't want to give up the throne while he was still alive, nor did he want to see father and son turn against each other. In order to divert everyone's attention, the king of Ming's envoy arrived, and he agreed to send troops to the South Ming kingdom. However, he didn't think that the king of Ming would be so snobbish and throw them aside as soon as he gained power. As for the southern Ming Empire, All he wanted was a marriage alliance with a princess to express his goodwill. At the same time, he wanted to strengthen his authority in the Jiaoji Empire. To think that the mercenaries would come all the way here and create such a chaotic situation. If the crown prince could do it, it would be because the king had a good eye for talent. If it didn't work, it would be because he had suppressed the crown prince's arrogance. Thus, Li had been watching coldly from the sidelines and didn't have any intention of making a move. Now that a hole had been opened in the capital, it was time for him to take charge of the situation and turn the tide. As soon as he appeared, he first reprimanded Li Yuanlong, strongly suppressing the crown prince's arrogance. When this hand was shown, those who originally wanted to flatter the crown prince's smelly feet had to think deeply. The old king was still alive. Should they restrain themselves? Just as some officials were considering their stance, King Li's voice sounded again. However, there was a sense of desolation in his voice. Since they have already entered the city, we should leave. Pass down the order. The East Gate will continue to resist, but it doesn't need to be too intense. We just need to delay their advance. As for the others, withdraw from Hanei City and head to Shiyu City. General Fan Yuhai is already waiting for us there with a large group of warriors. What? As soon as the voice fell, everyone looked up with a puzzled expression. Although it was true that the mercenaries had taken down the East Gate for the Jiaoji Kingdom's capital, Hanei City, they still had the power to resist. In many people's eyes, if they were willing to pay a large price, it was not impossible to counterattack and take back the city gate. But why did they have to withdraw? What they didn't expect was that the king seemed to have known that things would develop like this, and actually arranged a large number of soldiers in Shiyu City. They were still wondering why they couldn't see Fan Yuhai just now. It turned out that he had another important task. Many people couldn't figure it out, and their eyes fell on the crown prince Li Yuanlong, who was also kneeling on the ground. Obviously, they wanted the crown prince to stand up and question the king. Being looked at by so many expectant eyes, Li Yuanlong really wanted to stand up and say something. While he was thinking about what to say, King Li on the golden throne spoke first. That's right, I just received news that most of the Jiaojin County has been captured by the mercenaries. I'm afraid that the southern Sun County will be in danger. Plop! This was the sound of the crown prince wanting to stand up, but before he could do so, he fell to the ground. The Jiaojin County is the crown prince's headquarters and foundation. In the past few years, he had properly arranged all the officials there. It can be said that his orders there were far more effective than his father's. This was also what Li Yuanlong relied on. He just wanted to say that he would arrange for the Jiaojin County to send troops to save Hanei City. But now, the East Gate has been captured. This result was like a bolt from the blue that hit him so hard that he fell to the ground. At this moment, the only essence in his body seemed to have been sucked dry. The crown prince's performance fell into the eyes of some people. They quickly made a choice, and that was to continue supporting King Li. Look, the older the ginger, the spicier it is. With just a few words, the crown prince's reputation fell to the lowest point. It seems that he won't be able to recover in a few years. Even the crown prince didn't oppose it, so how could the other officials dare to question it? Besides, since the Jiaojin County has been captured, it means that the mercenaries are serious. If this is the case, then Hanei City really can't be protected. It's better to take a step back and retreat to Shiyu City. Some people even think that even if they retreat to Shiyu City, it might not be the end. Fortunately, the king also said that General Fan Yuhai, who was supposed to deploy troops under the crown prince's orders, had already gone to Shiyu City. Moreover, he had already gathered a lot of troops there under the king's orders. This made some people feel more at ease. With the appearance of the king, the officials who didn't know what to do quickly went to make arrangements. After all, their family business was in Hanei City. Now that they suddenly wanted to leave, it would be very troublesome to pack up. It would take at least 3 to 5 days. King Li seemed to have noticed this problem. He waved his hand and said, "Remember, you only have 2 days. From now on, some things will be transported to Shiyu City. After 2 days, if anyone is still in the city, they will have to face the ferocious mercenaries alone." 2 days. In the hands of the Great Ming's Ming and Southern Ming officials, there was definitely not enough time. Over the years, they had bought too many things, so naturally, there were many things that needed to be taken care of. However, Jiaoji was only a small country. Whether it was the economy or agriculture, it wasn't very developed. Even if the officials wanted to fish, there was a limit to what they could get. If they used the 2 days, they would be able to take care of most of it. King Li gave the order to retreat. At the East Gate, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin was completely unaware of this. He was currently organizing people to guard the gate tower. Before the battle, Kong Chuanxin had discussed with his subordinates. It wasn't a big problem to take down Hanei City's East Gate by surprise. The key was whether or not they could defend it. After all, there were tens of thousands of Jiaoji soldiers in the city. Moreover, as long as they were organized properly, the Jiaoji citizens in the city could quickly form an army. If they really attacked like a wave, they would eventually run out of bullets. It was hard to say whether or not the 3,000 mercenaries would be able to defend the East Gate. Chapter 511. In fact, the number of mercenaries was far less than 3,000. After leaving a temporary auxiliary battalion and a cold vanguard company outside the city to take care of the 7,000 Jiaoji soldiers, the number of mercenaries at the East Gate Tower was only about 2,300. They were not fighting on their home ground, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Kong Chuanxin did not have the confidence to win. Logically speaking, he should have sent someone to report to Yang Qindong and request for the main force to arrive quickly. That way, he would be able to put down the heavy burden on his shoulders. However, he did not do so. At least from his point of view, the situation had not reached that critical point yet. Kong Chuanxin, who was already prepared, had even prepared a lot of bows and arrows so that he could save some bullets at the critical moment to prepare for a counterattack. However, what he saw was completely different from what he expected. The Jiaoji soldiers had no intention of charging forward. They were only a few hundred meters away from the East Gate Tower, staring at him. It was as if they would not move if he did not move. What are they doing? Kong Chuanxin felt that he could not see through the current situation. He ordered his scouts to look around to see if the other party had any tricks up their sleeves. At the same time, he sent someone to contact the agents of the Security Bureau in Hanoi City. He needed more information about the city. The scouts were sent out. They used telescopes to look around. However, the results were confusing. Not only did they not see any signs of Jiaoji soldiers moving around, they also saw many carriages coming out of the West Gate. Soon, the agents of the Security Bureau contacted them. The agents brought more accurate information. The Jiaoji soldiers had started to retreat. It seemed like they had no intention of fighting in Hanoi City. What are they doing? Even though Kong Chuanxin's mind was very open, he still could not understand the situation after receiving this report. Battalion Commander, let's report this to the 6th Young Master. Company Commander Tyance also could not understand the reason behind this. However, he knew that there was one person who could figure it out. That person was Yang Qindong. Okay. Kong Chuanxin nodded. After all, the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. Since there was such a big change, of course, he had to report this matter to the 6th Young Master. Next, whether to fight or stop, all they had to do was listen to orders. Just like that, the scouts rode out from the East Gate and headed straight for the main force of the mercenaries that were rushing over from the north. Under the leadership of Yang Qindong, the main force of the mercenaries advanced slowly while practicing their marksmanship. On one hand, he wanted to see if Kong Chuanxin's 3rd Battalion had the ability to fight alone and take down Hanoi City. On the other hand, this batch of bullets was requested in a hurry, so there was a slight discrepancy in the specifications, which directly reduced the accuracy. He wanted to request the Crimson City Munitions factory to ensure both efficiency and quality. After that, he could only increase the number of target practice sessions to make up for the hit rate. Fortunately, after nearly 3 days of training, after each soldier had fired at least 100 bullets, the rate of hitting the target had significantly increased. Only then could he relax a little. It was also at this time that the scouts sent by Kong Chuanxin arrived. In reality, they were only 40 miles away from Hanoi City. The sudden arrival of the scouts inevitably caused Yang Qindong to have many guesses. He believed that the scouts were most likely here to ask for help, so he immediately met with the scouts and learned about what happened in Hanoi City. The Jiaoji soldiers are retreating out of the city. Is this news accurate? After listening to the scouts' report, Yang Qindong also showed a puzzled expression. It was just that he hit it very well and no one else noticed. Replying to the 6th young master's question, this matter has been confirmed by the scouts of the 3rd Battalion and the agents of the Security Bureau stationed in Hanoi City. Moreover, our commander also said that after taking over the east side of the city, other than the first wave of fierce counterattacks from the Jiaoji army, there were no more big battles to fight. The scout was smart enough not to give a yes or no answer. He only reported what he knew. Okay, I understand. You can go and rest for a while. Yang Qindong nodded. With the above evidence, the Jiaoji army was really going to retreat. He couldn't help but sigh. As the commander of the Jiaoji army, this kind of courage was truly admirable. Yang Qindong had already made preparations to fight with the main forces of the Jiaoji army in Hanoi City. At that time, with the powerful weapons in his hands, he could guarantee that the Jiaoji army would be completely defeated. If that happened, the outcome of the battle in Jiaoji would be decided. However, from the looks of it, things weren't that simple. Although he still didn't understand why the Jiaoji army would give up on their capital. If he didn't take advantage of such a good opportunity, it would be a waste. Tiger's man immediately passed down the order. The army is to move out at full speed and rush to Hanoi City. Since there was a good opportunity to chase after the enemy, Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't let it go. He immediately made the decision. After the order was given, the mercenary army, which had been moving slowly, suddenly moved forward at a rapid pace. The army of close to 60,000 men was like a long snake heading straight for Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoji. It was only a distance of 40 li, and in less than 8 hours, the 60,000 men had all arrived. Outside the city, 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin was leading a group of officers to welcome Yang Qindong's arrival. When they saw Yang Qindong approaching on horseback, Kong Chuanxin and the rest maintained their upright posture and gave a standard military salute. Yang Qindong dismounted from his horse, returned the salute, and shook hands with Kong Chuanxin and the rest. Then, he said with an extremely confident tone, "All of you have worked hard. After this, I will definitely reward you based on your contributions. Now, let's talk about the situation in the city." When he heard that they would be rewarded based on their contributions, Kong Chuanxin's mouth widened into a smile. "Thank you for your affirmation, 6th young master. The situation in the city is already very clear. The Jiaoji army is indeed retreating. The information from the agents of the Security Bureau is that the Crown Prince, Li Yuanlong, is no longer in charge of the Jiaoji nation. Instead, the old king, Li is in charge. Retreating from Jiaoji to Shiyu City was also the old king's decision." "Oh, Li Li's decision? Yang Chendong nodded his head. If that was the case, then everything made sense. Who was Li Li? He was someone who dared to go against the great Ming dynasty at its peak. Not only were his methods sharp and vicious, but he also had an extraordinary view of the big picture. This kind of person would often make some risky decisions. However, behind such military actions, there were often unspeakable secrets. Along the way, Yang Chendong finally understood the purpose of the Jiaoji army's actions. He had to admit that this was indeed a brilliant move to take the initiative. Unfortunately, this move was still too weak to deal with the mercenaries and himself. Kong Chuanxin still didn't understand the purpose of Li Li's actions. When he saw that Yang Chendong was deep in thought, he couldn't help but ask anxiously, "Sixth young master, why do you think the Jiaoji army is doing this?" "Why? Of course, it's because they don't want to be led by the nose. They want to jump outside and attack us." Yang Chendong chuckled with a confident expression. Jump outside and attack us? Kong Chuanxin still didn't understand. It wasn't just him. Even the 2nd Regiment commander, Luo Pe, and 2nd Battalion commander, Chun Bo, who were following behind Yang Chendong, were also confused. "Bring me the map." Yang Chendong knew that if he didn't explain the situation clearly to his subordinates, they wouldn't be confident when the battle started. He waved his hand and asked Tiger's Ming to bring over the hand-drawn map of Jiaoji. A few of the officers grabbed a corner of the map and spread it open. Then Yang Chendong pointed at the Jiaoji capital, Hanoi City, and said, "We are here now. Shiyu City is slightly northwest of Hanoi, less than 200 li away, compared to Hanoi City, which is the capital. Shiyu City is where we have to pass to head to the west and north. If we don't deal with this, we won't be able to head in either direction with ease. Otherwise, we will face the danger of having our supplies and provisions cut off." After hearing this, Luo Pe and the rest nodded their heads. Obviously, they agreed with Yang Chendong's judgment and analysis. Yang Chendong then pointed at the map and said, "Hanoi City is the capital of Jiaoji, but at the same time, the environment here is very complicated. It's not like Chu-Yi City and Beidai City. There are many cities and roads that lead to Hanoi City. In other words, if we occupy this place, we will be attacked from all directions at any time. Although I don't know what that old man, Li Li, is thinking, I'm sure he will try to encircle us. With our limited manpower, we need to defend against enemies from all directions. On top of that, we have to deal with the mess in Hanoi City. It's not going to be easy." As he gestured for Tiger's Mane to keep the map, Yang Chendong looked at Luo Pe and the rest and asked, "How about it? If you have any thoughts or opinions, feel free to voice them out." Facing Yang Chendong's encouraging gaze, Luo Pe only hesitated for a moment before voicing his worries. Reporting to 6th Young Master, "The encirclement won't be a threat to us for the time being. We will talk about it after the enemy has settled down. However, the internal strife in Hanoi City must be resolved. In order to solve the problem of chaos, we must first solve the problem of food. Food has become the most important thing." Chapter 5:12. Haha, not bad. Yang Chendong was very happy to see Luo hit the nail on the head. He really hoped that his officers could grow quickly and become independent. Otherwise, conquering the world was a huge undertaking, and it was impossible to rely on a few limited people. Commander Luo is right. Since that is the case, what are we waiting for? 6th Young Master, the 2nd Battalion requests for battle. Battalion Commander Chun Bo, who was eager to give it a try, was the first to speak when he saw the opportunity. The 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin was still contemplating the pros and cons of this plan when Chun Bo suddenly spoke up to snatch the right to lead the attack. He immediately said in dissatisfaction, "Battalion Commander Chun, Hanoi City was conquered by our 3rd Battalion first. The task of entering the city and snatching the rations should naturally be done by our 3rd Battalion. Isn't that right, Regiment Commander? Seeing that both of his battalion commanders were requesting to join the battle, Luopa smiled at Political Commissar Kong Jia. Then he looked at Yang Qindong without blinking. As a commander, he couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. Of course, it was best to let the 6th young master handle this. Yang Qindong knew that the food was important now, and it wasn't the time to argue. He immediately said, "All right, 3rd Battalion has taken down Hanoi's East City Tower. They are very tired. The task of stealing food will be handed over to 2nd Battalion. But I'll say the ugly words first. If you can't control the granary, then you should obediently withdraw and let 3rd Battalion take over. Oh, right, when we attack later, we can let Hong Jin's Jiaoji mercenaries take the lead." Next would be a city battle, also known as a street battle. It was naturally much more dangerous than fighting in the open field. Of course, such a dangerous task would be left to Hong Jin's Jiaoji mercenaries. 6th Young Master, please don't worry. 2nd Battalion will complete the task. Chun Bo saluted and went to prepare. After gathering the 2 battalions and the 2 auxiliary battalions, as well as the 4 temporary auxiliary battalions, the battalion commanders of the Cold Front Battalion could mobilize far more soldiers than a regiment. He also arranged for someone to call Hong Jin over. At this time, Hong Jin was happily busy. Ever since Yang Qindong had given him permission to build a 30,000-strong army, he had put all his energy into this matter. When they had just set off from Beatty City, they had already gathered a team of 2,000 people. Originally, he thought that it would take a lot of time for the team to grow. Unexpectedly, an opportunity presented itself when they arrived at Hanoi City. In front of him were the 6,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had been captured. Originally, there were 7,000 men, but after Kong Chuanxin's 3rd Battalion took away 1,000 strong men, there were only 6,000 left. Hong Jin was overjoyed at the sudden appearance of 6,000 soldiers. He immediately sent people to work on these people. There was no lack of methods to scare them. If they did not join the ranks of the Jiaoji mercenaries, they would be sent to reform through labor and work as laborers for the rest of their lives. Being able to eat rations as a soldier was naturally better than being a coolie. Soon, his army expanded from 2,000 to 8,000. Hong Jin had also become a powerful general. Even so, Hong Jin did not have any pride in his heart. He knew that compared to a real mercenary army, he was still an outsider. Especially in front of the most elite Lung Feng, he and his 8,000 men were nothing more than a motley crew. If they really fought, they had no chance of winning. With such feelings, he was called to the 2nd Battalion commander, Chen Bo. "General Hong, the opportunity to make a contribution has come. The 6th Young Master said that you and I should work together to kill our way into Hanoi City and take control of the places where the rations are stored. All right, you should be very familiar with the geography of the city." Hearing that there was a battle to fight, Hong Jin became very excited. Although he knew that using him now was mostly to be used as a shield and that there would be a lot of casualties, it was better to be useful than useless. At that moment, he imitated the mercenaries and stood at attention. He saluted and said, "Don't worry, Battalion Commander Chen. I am very familiar with the situation in Hanoi City. I also know where the rations are stored. I even know where the rations are stored. You only need to bring your men and follow behind me." Chun Bo was very happy that Hong Jin was so considerate. "Very good. Then I will rely on you, General Hong. When this is done, I will definitely ask the 6th Young Master to reward you." "Thank you for your guidance, Battalion Commander Chen." Hong Jin was waiting for this sentence. After saying this, he chuckled. With Hong Jin's guarantee and lead, the 8,000 Jiaoji mercenaries tied a white towel on their right arm. After that, the army quickly entered Hanoi City from the East City Gate. Behind them were 7 battalions, with the 2nd Battalion of Lung Fong as the main force. There were close to 3,000 soldiers in total. A total of 11,000 people suddenly appeared and launched a fierce attack on Hanoi City. The originally balanced situation instantly went out of control. It was true that the mercenaries had taken down the East City Gate Tower, but due to the lack of manpower, they were still in a defensive state. This caused the Jiaoji soldiers to slowly let down their guard. In their eyes, it was already a good thing that they did not initiate an attack. Why would the enemy dare to take the initiative to find trouble with them? With such an arrogant attitude, the sudden appearance of more than 10,000 mercenaries caught the Jiaoji army in the city off guard. After that, the two sides engaged in a chaotic battle for more than 2 hours. In the end, when Chunbo led the real mercenaries to appear, the battle became one-sided. The Jiaoji soldiers were defeated. In just the beginning of the battle, the Jiaoji mercenaries lost 2,000 men and injured 1,000. The Jiaoji soldiers suffered even more losses. The corpses and blood on the ground proved everything. You did well. There are always casualties in war. However, these deaths are valuable. Chun Bo was afraid that Hong Jin would be heartbroken over the loss. He walked over and patted Hong Jin's shoulder, encouraging him. "I am fine. Don't worry, Battalion Commander Chun. Next, we can charge to the 3rd Street in the west. There is a granary in the city there." Hong Jin shook his head and chuckled. Speaking of which, Chun Bo was overly worried. Just as he had said, how could there be no deaths in a war? Often, in a big war, even if the winning side lost thousands or tens of thousands of people, it was an extremely normal thing. Only the mercenaries would suffer a huge loss if they lost a few hundred men. Therefore, Hong Jin did not care about such a small loss. Moreover, these people had just joined him. They did not have any feelings for each other. If they died, they died. In any case, he could continue to recruit soldiers in the future. As long as he gained Yang Qindong's trust, he would not have to worry about the source of soldiers. Hong Jin did not have to worry about this. He became the king of Li. Originally, the 2 days he gave the officials was a little rushed. This caused chaos in some places. However, who would have thought that the mercenaries would take the initiative to attack? This made his so-called 2 days even more tense. He even felt that it was not enough. "Pass down my orders. Immediately send 20,000 men to suppress the mercenaries. We must suppress the mercenaries' attack." Li shouted to the generals in the palace. When he turned around and left the palace, he ordered the people in the palace to quickly leave the city with him. Take what you can take, and don't take what you can't take. Just hide them. He firmly believed that there would be a day when he would return. 20,000 men were sent out. However, they had lost their fighting spirit. How could they be a match for the mercenaries who were desperately looking for people to fight? After a few small-scale chaos, thousands of corpses were left behind. The Jiaoji army in the city fought as they retreated. Most of them gathered around the West City Gate. If they really wanted to cut off the Jiaoji army's retreat, it would be a bloody and bitter battle. For the sake of their only retreat, the Jiaoji army would not give up easily. In the end, both sides would suffer great losses. However, Chun Bo's goal was not to cut off the Jiaoji army's retreat. They wanted more food. Since everyone's goals were different, there were fewer conflicts. In the end, after 2 days, the Jiaoji royal family, the officials, and the nobles all left Hanoi. Chun Bo and the others also managed to snatch 2 granaries of food as they wished, as well as the food stored by some of the larger families. The logistics department had already done the calculations. This amount of food was enough to feed an army of 300,000 for a year. With food, Yang Qindong's heart could be at ease. While praising Chunbo for completing his mission, he also called Hong Jin over and allowed him to expand the Jiaoji mercenaries in the city. Of course, the military strength was still 30,000. Most of the nobles in Jiaoji had fled, but most of the commoners did not. Their ancestral property was here. If they really fled, they did not know where they could go or what they could do. As such, they were like criminals waiting to be judged, waiting in their own homes. At this moment, the 47,000 Jiaoji youths were put to use. Back when they were in Crimson City, they had already undergone systematic learning. While not all of them were elementary scholars, they were still able to read and communicate with others. After arriving at Beidai City, they were met by Yang Qindong a few times and had a few lectures. As such, they knew what to do next. Now that it was time to send them to work, under the protection of the Jiaoji mercenaries, the auxiliary mercenaries, and temporary auxiliary soldiers, they began to roam the streets. The tasks that these youths had to do were simple and even crude. They would explain the policies of the mercenaries to the commoners. They would tell them that as long as they lived like before, farming and doing business, no one would make things difficult for them. The mercenaries would even sell some of the food to them to ensure that they had enough to eat. Chapter 5:13. The policy was announced. Those who cooperated would naturally receive the basic respect of the mercenaries. However, those who did not cooperate would be in trouble. The educated youth would stand on the street and wave his hand, and the mercenaries or Jiaoji mercenaries would rush over to capture them. Then they would casually label them or send them to reform through labor. Those who committed serious crimes would be killed on the street. Yang Qindong would not tolerate the foreign races as much as he did the Han people. Yang Qindong would even tolerate the ethnic minorities living in the Han area, such as the Miao people. However, he would not be courteous to the Jiaoji people, a fickle and petty country. It was either to admit defeat or to arrest him. There was no third option. Under the high-pressure policy, the law and order in Hanoi City returned to normal in just 5 days. When Yang Qindong walked on the streets, he saw the normal life of the citizens. The only difference was that the smell of blood on the streets had not dissipated. Moreover, he could often see the mercenaries patrolling the streets. Looking at the statistics sent by the Tiger's Man, more than 5,000 people had been killed in Hanoi City in 5 days, and more than 40,000 had been captured. Hanoi City, which originally had 300,000 citizens, was now left with only 250,000 people. It was a loss of 1/6 of its original population. Of course, the 5,000 people killed were not only the Jiaoji people who resisted. There were also some Jiaoji people who wanted to fish in troubled waters, and some Jiaoji mercenaries who wanted to take advantage of the situation to commit all kinds of crimes. Hong Jin had already been reprimanded by Yang Qindong for this matter. Regardless, the situation had temporarily stabilized, and the atmosphere in the city had changed. The next step was to send these people to Chui City in batches, and then send them to Ryukyu Island by sea. That place was lacking in population. This time, when the 50,000 educated youth were transferred from there, Yu Qian, who was in charge of the overall situation there, was very unhappy. In the end, Yang Qindong said that there would be more than 100,000 people. Only then did he reluctantly agree. Yu Qian was such a person. He had a righteous heart, and he was not afraid of anyone. Even if it was Yang Qindong's order, he would still dare to refute it. Since they had agreed to send back 100,000 people, the 40,000 people they had captured earlier would become the first batch. There was still a gap of 60,000 people, and they would have to choose from the civilians of Hanoi City. Of course, such trivial matters would be handled by others. Yang Qindong only needed to arrange the orders. In 5 days, the situation in Hanoi City was stabilized, especially with sufficient food. The atmosphere in the city was normal. However, it was a completely different story outside the city. Previously, when Li had retreated from Hanoi City, Yang Qindong had already guessed that the other party was preparing to besiege Hanoi City. However, he didn't know what the other party would do. However, 5 days later, he finally received news that Li had not only gathered 200,000 troops near Shiyu City, but he had also allied with the Lan-Tsang Kingdom, Laos in the future, sending 100,000 troops from Yingluan to Hanoi, with 300,000 troops outside. This was the feast that Li had prepared for Yang Qindong. Ha! This Li is really getting old. Does he think that this young master will play some kind of battle with him? He wants to surround me with these few people. Humph! Yang Qindong sneered as he looked at the report in Tiger's Mane's hand and threw it aside. Then he said thoughtfully, "The Lan-Tsang Kingdom has also intervened. That's good. Originally, I thought that just dealing with Jiaoji wouldn't be much of a challenge. Since they want to interfere, then I'll just deal with them as well." At this moment, Yang Qindong was showing great confidence, without a trace of nervousness or panic. Seeing him like this, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei were also full of confidence. In their eyes, there was nothing in the world that could stop the young master and the young master. 5 days was enough for the news of Hanoi City to spread. In the southern Ming capital's Nanjing residence, Zhu Qizhen, who was in the imperial palace, received this news. In that instant, he was so shocked that he almost fell off his throne. "Be careful, Your Majesty." Eunuch Chao Jixiang, who had been observing from the side, was also given a fright and hurriedly reached out to support him. Zhu Qizhen, who had been supported by his arm, was covered in cold sweat. He didn't seem to care about Chao Jixiang at all. Instead, he seemed to be asking a question, as if he was talking to himself. "Great companion, is this true? Yang Qindong only has 10,000 soldiers, and he can take down the Jiaoji Kingdom's capital. There should be hundreds of thousands of Jiaoji soldiers there." Chao Jixiang didn't know how to answer this question, and this result was also out of his expectations. Like many others, he thought that Yang Qindong was overestimating himself by declaring war on Jiaoji. Even if he had the most advanced firearms in his possession, the lack of manpower was still a major drawback. Moreover, the environment, terrain, and climate there were all different from the Great Ming Dynasty. It would take a long time for them to adapt to the environment there. It was just like when the Great Ming had sent troops to Jiaoji. They had been quite aggressive, but because many of them couldn't adapt to the environment, they had lost a lot of soldiers, and they couldn't do much. With this as an example, the mercenaries wouldn't fare much better. Who knew that the mercenaries would be so ferocious and be able to kill their way into the Great Ming's capital in such a short period of time, and even succeed? Even King Li, who was not to be trifled with, had no choice but to retreat. Moreover, according to the reports, this old king had been forced to ally with the Lan-Tsang Kingdom to defend against the Great Ming's forces. Only then had he been able to stand firm. The changes and developments of the situation had indeed exceeded everyone's expectations. This was why Zhu Qizhen was so shocked, but this was within reason. It took a while for Zhu Qizhen's expression to return to normal, but the fear in his heart did not lessen. Since Yang Qindong could force Jiaoji to suffer defeat after defeat, what would happen if he fought with the southern Ming army? He didn't dare to think about it. Zhu Qizhen felt some regret. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have given Yang Qindong a chance to attack Jiaoji. At that time, he had wanted to weaken the Great Ming's strength, but now it seemed that he was strengthening the Great Ming's strength. After all, if an army wanted to develop, it was like a flower seedling wanting to grow. First, it had to find a suitable soil. Whether it was in the southern Ming or Beiming, there was no such soil for mercenaries to grow. With so many restrictions, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be for an army to develop. However, once they went out, it would be different. The reports had clearly stated that the captured Chu-Yi and Beatty cities of Jiaoji were being managed by mercenaries. This meant that they had a certain foundation. If they were allowed to develop, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all, just 10,000 mercenaries were able to force the Jiaoji army to retreat. Once this army's numbers continued to increase, what would happen? Wouldn't that mean that one day the great Ming Empire wouldn't be a match for them and would be in great danger? When he thought about how this danger was caused by him, it would be strange if Zhu Qizhen's expression was good. This won't do. We can't let them develop any further. Pass down my decree. Have Lu Deshang immediately come to an agreement with Jiaoji. At the same time, send a decree to Duke Zhongdan. Tell him that Jiaoji has been on good terms with the southern Ming Empire for generations. Now, they have submitted to me and agreed to establish a new Jiaoji province. This was Zhu Qizhen oppressing Yang Qindong with the general trend, making his painstaking efforts go down the drain. After saying all this, Zhu Qizhen asked Cao Jixiang, "Have the people sent to Jianing left?" Cao Jixiang knew that Zhu Qizhen was concerned about Yang Qindong's fourth brother, Yang. He immediately nodded and replied, "Reporting to your majesty, they have already set off. They should have arrived in Jianing by now." Zhu Qizhen didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes and thought for a moment. When Zhu Qizhen opened his eyes, a new idea had appeared. "Great friend, immediately send a trusted aide to Jianing. Inform them that they must treat Duke Zhongdan's fourth brother well. At the same time, they must invite him to Nanjing. I want to give him a high position. Temporarily, he will be the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Works." The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Works was a secondary class, rank 5 official position. In comparison, the position in the Ministry of Works wasn't an important position and didn't have much power. It was more symbolic. Previously, he sent people to Jianing to capture Yang Qindong. Although he didn't say what crime he would commit, capturing Yang Qindong first was a form of intimidation. However, now that he suddenly gave Yang Qindong an official position, Cao Jixiang couldn't help but have another thought. Was the emperor a little too timid? Otherwise, why would he suddenly change his mind and give Yang Qindong an official position? Of course, this could also be seen as a way of showing goodwill or conciliation. However, this was only possible after the fall of the Jiaoji nation. It seemed that the real reason was already on the verge of being revealed. However, no matter what thoughts he had, since this was the emperor's decree, Cao Jixiang had to obey. He immediately nodded and replied, "Yes, your majesty." Then he turned around and went to do his work. After the decree was passed down, Lu Da, who was originally arguing with the Jiaoji envoy and wanted more benefits, immediately changed his attitude. He expressed that he could ignore King Li Li's impudence and disrespect, referring to old Li wanting to marry the third princess of the Ming dynasty. As long as they really submitted to the great Ming dynasty, paid tribute every year, called themselves Jiaoji province, and sent troops to suppress the rebellion behind King Min and King Shiping, then the southern Ming dynasty could order Duke Zhongdan to withdraw his troops. Chapter 5:14. The Jiaoji envoy had also received the news that the capital had fallen, and his heart was already in chaos. Now that Lu Da was willing to take a step back, how could he not be grateful? He immediately expressed that Jiaoji was willing to submit, and he only hoped that the great Ming Duke would quickly withdraw his troops. After all, if this continued, Jiaoxi would not be far from being destroyed. At that time, even if they withdrew their troops, it would not be King Li anymore. What was the difference between retreating and not retreating? Since the man had feelings for the woman, the agreement was quickly reached. Following this, the Jiaoxi envoy and the great Ming envoy left Nanjing together, heading straight for Jiaoxi. This was imperial power. In order to achieve their own selfish goals, they did not care about what the mercenaries had done, even if they were expanding the territory for the Han. 3 days later, the news that Yang Qindong had led the mercenaries to attack Jiaoxi finally reached Bai Ming's capital. Similarly, substitute sect master Zhu Qiyu was shocked to the core. During this period of time, Bai Ming had been peaceful and united, and they had been looking for a way to develop. The southern Ming dynasty was in chaos, and their minds were filled with lawsuits. They did not care about Bai Ming at all, and the wall in the north was vigorously developing their businesses, so they had no intention of finding trouble with Bai Ming. With the outside world stable, Bai Ming had time to rest. Zhu Qiyu could be considered a wise ruler. With the outside world stable, he recruited and trained his troops, and the morale and numbers of his troops had been greatly improved. This was especially so after receiving the Type 81 automatic assault rifle from the mercenaries. He had spent a lot of effort researching it, and the production of firearms and cannons had been continuously pushed forward. Although there was still a long way to go before they could produce a finished product, they were indeed starting to see the light of day. For example, they had already produced some ordinary cannons, and they had also begun to see the light of day in the structure of the Type 81 automatic assault rifle. It could be said that as long as they were given 1 or 2 more years, they might really be able to produce a Type 81 automatic assault rifle. This was the wisdom of the Han. As long as they were willing to put in the effort, there was nothing that could not be done. Just like in the future, it only took China a few decades to catch up with the most developed countries in the world economically. Although there was still a certain gap, it was obvious that the gap was getting smaller and smaller. All aspects of the work were on the right track, and Zhu Qiyu's throne was becoming more and more stable. At this moment, his thoughts were a little wild. He wondered if there was a chance to unify the northern and southern Ming dynasty and recreate the glory of the great Ming dynasty. However, in order to achieve this goal, there were some problems that had to be solved. One of the problems that needed to be solved was the problem of Yang Qindong. On one point, Zhu Qiyu and Zhu Qizhen had the same idea. They were both somewhat afraid of the existence of Yang Qindong and the mercenaries behind him. Zhu Qiyu would never forget who was the one who forced Wallace's army to retreat. He still remembered that at that time, when all the generals and soldiers under his command were helpless, it was Yang Qindong who took the initiative to stand up and easily made Walla retreat. At that time, Zhu Qiyu was still very grateful to Yang Qindong. If it was not for him, Bai Ming would have long ceased to exist. It was because of this that he was given the title of Duke of Loyalty. Now, the northern Ming dynasty was at peace, but Yang Qindong's power and influence were getting bigger and bigger. This made Zhu Qiyu very tired of it. She even became a little worried about personal gains and losses. It was because of this that when Jin Ying and the others proposed to send people to assassinate Yang Qindong, Zhu Qiyu did not stop them. Instead, he tacitly agreed to all of this. However, he never expected that even though he had sent out quite a few people, he still could not find a suitable opportunity. It seemed like this Duke of Loyalty also knew that he had offended too many people. Normally, his security measures were very good, making it difficult for others to make a move. Those who sent out people could not find a suitable opportunity. Fortunately, Yang Qindong actually took the initiative to send troops to Jiaoxi. When he first received this news, Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed. He thought that this was because some people were overconfident. However, who would have thought that Jiaoji, which the great Ming had no choice but to give up by force, would actually be forcefully opened up by Yang Qindong and his mercenaries? Not only that, they even occupied the capital. He originally thought that Yang Qindong was in great danger, and that he might even be defeated and killed without him making a move. Zhu Qiyu began to make preparations to take over the immortal abode and realm beyond heaven. This was especially true of the Yang family's bank. The amount of money, and there was already enough to make Zhu Qiyu drool. This was something that couldn't be helped. Many merchants who had business dealings with the realm beyond heaven had to first deposit their money with the Yang family's bank. They could only do business with the bank's banknotes. This was not only the case for ordinary merchants of the Great Ming. Even the merchants of the Walla had to follow the same rules. This greatly increased the scale and influence of the Yang family's bank. The amount of gold and silver deposited there exceeded 40 million taels, enough to surpass the amount of money in Baiming's national treasury. Zhu Qiyu had always been watching the development of the Yang family's bank with the cold eye of a bystander. He was only waiting for the right opportunity to take over the bank. When news of Yang Qindong's mercenaries entering Jiaoji arrived, he believed that the opportunity had arrived. He had sent out quite a few people to keep an eye on the Yang family's bank, precisely to prevent them from suddenly transferring their money. However, not only had Yang Qindong not been defeated in Jiaoji, he had even won one battle after another. This made Zhu Qiyu's originally blazing heart feel as if it had been doused with cold water, instantly cooling down. Emperor Daizong was naturally drenched in cold sweat. If he really had been impatient and taken the Yang family's bank for himself, wouldn't he have offended Yang Qindong to the extreme? If that had happened, Baiming would have been in deep trouble. Putting aside whether or not Zhu Qiyu truly feared Yang Qindong, at the very least, he didn't want to fight with him right now. At the very least, before his new army was fully trained and firearms were manufactured, he needed to develop steadily. Pass down the decree. Have those keeping an eye on the Yang family's bank, the realm beyond heaven, the immortal abode, and the Yang family manor withdraw. Zhu Qiyu's expression was somewhat unsightly. His voice was somewhat weak as he spoke to the head eunuch Jining. Your Majesty, should we send them all back? Or should we leave half of our men to keep an eye on them? After all, the situation in Jiaoji is constantly changing. Moreover, news has come from the southern Ming Empire that Emperor Yingzong has already taken action to prevent the Duke of Loyalty from interfering in Jiaoji's war. Jin Ying asked carefully. Of course, he was also voicing his own suggestions. When Zhu Qiyu thought of the news from the southern Ming Empire, he couldn't help but nod. Even so, there's no need to leave half of our men behind. Just leave a small portion to keep an eye on them. In any case, don't draw their ire for now. This subject understands. Jining nodded, then silently withdrew. In less than half a day, the people keeping an eye on Yang Qindong's businesses in the capital had all disappeared. It was as if they had never been there, blending into the sea of people and disappearing without a trace. 15 li south of the capital, in the Yang family manor, a carriage sped through the gates. Even though Yang Qindong had already left the Yang family manor for several months, the security here was still very high. Even this carriage bearing the Yang family's banner had to go through at least 3 security checks before it was allowed to enter the manor. As soon as it entered the Yang family manor, the sound of reading could be heard from afar. It was the sound coming from the Yang family academy. After spending enough money, Yang Qindong had hired a few scholars to teach here. Other than them, Yang Qindong's students like Wang Si had also stayed here to become teachers, continuing to spread the ideology of the Yang family. The carriage stopped in front of the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor. Then, a fat man walked out from within. Young Master Fu, second madam is waiting for you in the main hall of the front courtyard. Please follow me. The person who welcomed him was Yang Si, one of the main pillars that Yang Chendong had left behind. The person who was called Young Master Fu was naturally Yang Chendong's cousin, Yang Fu. He was already the person in charge of the Yang family's business. His body was much fatter than when he was in Jianing Prefecture, but at the same time, he had the aura of a superior. Thinking about it, even Walla merchants couldn't help but flatter him when they saw him. He was an existence that didn't dare to offend. In this kind of environment, he naturally had a powerful aura. However, this aura was only useful in the business world. Speaking of which, when he came to the Yang family manor, he restrained it as much as he could. At this moment, he was smiling kindly at Yang Si. Then I'll have to trouble brother Yang Si. Yang Fu was here to see second Madam Chiaoyin. This personal servant who had followed the sixth young master since Yang was taken in as a concubine and stayed in the Yang family manor became Yang Chendong's representative. Every once in a while, a person in power like Yang Chendong would come to report on the situation at hand. Then, the second madam would send someone to gather the information and send it to Yang Chendong, who was far away in the southern Ming Empire. Young Master Fu, you're welcome. Yang Si also smiled and said. Then, the two of them walked into the manor, one in front of the other. Brother Yang Si, the sixth young master, won the battle in Jiaoji. Even those ignorant people in the vicinity have lessened by a lot. Just thinking about it makes me happy. Yang Fu walked into the courtyard with his somewhat heavy body while expressing his good mood. Yes, some people just don't learn from their mistakes. If the sixth young master was here, they wouldn't have the chance to show themselves. Now that they've left, they must have been frightened. Yang Si also chuckled. 2 hours ago, he had already received the news that the number of people watching them outside the manor and around the Yang family's businesses in the city had lessened significantly. This made Yang Si let out a long sigh of relief, and at the same time felt the burden on his shoulders lighten. Chapter 5:15. All of this was the result of Yang Chendong's victories. Yang Fu thought that with these victories as a foundation, his business would be better and he would be able to earn more money. He could no longer hide the happiness on his face. All of these were the effects of Yang Chendong's arrival in the Jiaoji kingdom. At this moment, in Hanoi City, Yang Chendong had gathered a group of military officers for a meeting to discuss the upcoming battle tomorrow. It had been exactly 8 days since they entered Hanoi City. In these 8 days, the city had gone from chaos to normalcy. Of course, this was due to the suppression of iron and blood. At the same time, it was also due to Hong Jin and Wan Chuncheng, the former subjects of the Jiaoji kingdom, who had played an important role. Needless to say, Hong Jin had already sold his life to Yang Chendong. Now, he had even become the general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. He had 30,000 men under him, although the army was formed at the last minute, and there was still room for improvement. 30,000 men was still enough to intimidate the commoners. As for Wan Chuncheng, he was the one who took the initiative to step forward. After occupying Hanoi City, Yang Chendong sent someone to send Wan Chuncheng over from Beidao City. The moment the prime minister of Jiaoji walked into the capital, he could smell the stench of blood in the air and the blood that had yet to be cleaned up. As the prime minister of a country, Wan Chuncheng had a heart that empathized with the commoners. Seeing his subjects being slaughtered because of resistance, he could not bear to see them being slaughtered. He took the initiative to ask Yang Chendong that he was willing to work with the commoners of Jiaoji to make them more obedient. Yang Chendong was naturally satisfied with Wan Chuncheng's initiative. He immediately put him and Hong Jin in charge of public security and the people's well-being. Needless to say, using foreigners to control foreigners was very effective. Many of the unsettled citizens of Jiaoji calmed down under the guidance of their countrymen, and the security in the city began to improve. In addition, a large number of adult males were recruited into the Jiaoji mercenary army, and a portion of them were separated and brought to Ryukyu Island via Beidai City and Chui City. As a result, the unstable aura in the city was suppressed. Naturally, there were still opposing forces. After all, there were more than 200,000 Jiaoji citizens in the city. However, the 47,000 cultured youths of Crimson City were not just for show. They roamed the streets and alleys every day, using their glib tongues to persuade the people of Jiaoji whenever they saw them. For ordinary people, this kind of lobbying was very effective. They valued their own lives more than anything else. As for who would rule over them, there were very few people who would risk their lives to resist under the general trend. It had to be said that slavery existed in any country and region. Now that the law and order in the city had been stabilized, the next thing to do was to fend off outsiders. Today, the military officers were called over to make a decision on the next step of the military plan. All the military camps above the company level and auxiliary battalion level were allowed to participate in today's military meeting. The meeting was held in the Palace Hall of Jiaoji. The hall was spacious enough that it was still somewhat empty even with dozens of officials present. Yang Qindong was naturally seated at the head of the table. On his left was Tiger's Mane, and on his right was Beta Persei. This made his identity stand out even more. In fact, this time, he was facing his own people. Logically speaking, Yang Qindong did not have to put on airs. However, as the Yang family's army grew stronger, the concept of hierarchy naturally became more and more rigid, based on the idea of a combination of political and military orders. If an army wanted to develop, there could be many ideas, but in the end, there could only be one voice. Otherwise, such an army would sooner or later encounter a huge problem. Sitting at the head of the table, Yang Qindong was analyzing the current situation for the military officers who came to participate in the meeting. Jiaoji's capital has been taken down by us. I'm sure it must be shocking. As soon as the sentence was said, there was a burst of laughter from below. It was obvious that everyone was laughing with pride. Yang Qindong also laughed. In his opinion, since they had done something to be proud of, why couldn't they laugh with pride? Therefore, he accompanied everyone and laughed for a while. When he felt the laughter gradually die down, he put away his smile and said seriously, "But just taking down a capital is far from enough. This is only the first step in our journey to the outside world. If everyone is satisfied now, I have to say that there will be many things that can satisfy you in the future. But I wonder if everyone wants to maintain the current situation, or do you want to make new contributions until one day your names resound throughout the world and be admired and worshipped by future generations? Make new contributions." Almost everyone said in unison. It was obvious that everyone was not satisfied. Especially after the process of achieving victory was not difficult, they naturally wanted to make more contributions. It would be best if they could leave a heavy mark in the history books. Fame and fortune had always been what people pursued. Even professional soldiers were no exception. All right, since that is the case, I'm sure everyone has rested enough. Let's discuss how to fight our way out tomorrow and make new contributions. Yang Qindong was waiting for everyone to say this. Since everyone's opinions were unified, he would not be polite. He stood up and walked to the sand table of Jiaoji's military terrain. Then he pointed at the sand table with a wooden stick and said, "Scouts report that in the northwest of Hanoi, Shiyu City, a total of 250,000 Jiaoji soldiers are gathered there. Among them, there are the elite elephant soldiers and the black soldiers who just returned from Lang's Sun. Their combat strength is estimated to be at level 2. With a wave of his right hand, he pointed at Yinglu City west of Hanoi and continued, "There are 100,000 reinforcements from the Lancang Kingdom stationed there. The general leading them is called La Ti. His ability is average. The quality of his troops is also average. Their combat strength is estimated to be at level 3. Su Yunsheng, you tell us about La Ti's personal information and the details of the Jiaoji army." After Yang Chendong gave a rough description, he threw the question to the young man standing at the side. Su Yunsheng, the platoon leader of the reconnaissance platoon, was equivalent to a scout general. Due to his outstanding performance, he started as a scout, then became a deputy squad leader, then a squad leader, then a deputy platoon leader, then a platoon leader. After the reconnaissance platoon expanded, he became the first company commander. He was directly under the command of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front. This time, he came to Hanoi from the rainforest of Langsun after combining all the reports of the scouts. After more than 20 days, he cooperated with Wu Sheng, the commander of the 1st Battalion of the Cold Front, to kill tens of thousands of Jiaoji soldiers in Langsun. Among them, Wan Gengwang's troops numbered around 15,000. Even Chun Heijin, one of the famous generals of Jiaoji, had killed around 8,000 Jiaoji soldiers. In fact, Battalion Commander Wu Sheng had only brought a little over 1,000 soldiers. 1,000 of them entangled the enemy's army of 60,000 and killed 23,000 in 20 days. Just this result alone was enough to make everyone speechless. It also allowed Wu Sheng to solidify his position as the battalion commander of the 1st Battalion. Once the Cold Front needed to expand, it would be logical for him to take another step forward. Didn't Su Yunsheng get promoted from platoon leader to company commander because of his cooperation and timely report? This time, when Yang Chendong directly called him out to introduce the situation, Su Yunsheng was very excited. Fortunately, he already knew the situation, so he didn't make any mistakes because of his excitement. "Everyone, let me introduce the 100,000 soldiers of the Lancang Kingdom. Their leader is called La Ti from the Liaoting tribe." The Lancang Kingdom was mainly made up of 3 factions. The strongest was the Liaoting tribe, followed by the Liaoting tribe, and lastly, the Liaoting tribe. This time, King Li had ceded Lurong, Xiwan, and Rinan prefectures in Jiaoji to request for the Lancang Kingdom to send reinforcements. The one who came was the general of the Liaoting tribe, La Ti. This person was in his early 30s, and his martial arts were not bad. He had also read a few military books, and could be considered a valiant general of the Lancang Kingdom. However, it was precisely because this person was brave and resourceful that he had big ambitions. He wanted to raise the status of the Liaoting tribe in the Lancang Kingdom. Sending reinforcements to Jiaoji this time was also his wish. He wanted to perform well and get on the good side of King Li. For this reason, even though they were nominally the Liaoting tribe of the Great Ming dynasty, they still sent reinforcements without the Great Ming Emperor's orders. Not only did they send out 100,000 soldiers, they also used the resources of the Liaoting tribe. Among them, there were 5,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 master archers. Speaking of which, the master archers of the Liaoting tribe were all proficient in using bows and arrows. Not only could they easily shoot arrows up to 100 meters away, they could also hit their targets. They were quite capable. Of course, a general like this who had always wanted something was also his weakness. If he did well, he could become a weak point that could be attacked. Back to the Jiaoji army. After General Chun Heijin's black soldiers received King Li's order to retreat to Shiyu City, the number of Jiaoji army soldiers there had reached 250,000. Just the elite soldiers alone numbered 100,000. Among them were 20,000 elephant soldiers, 25,000 black soldiers, 20,000 crown soldiers, and 35,000 king's guards. This was especially true for the king's guards. Their shield-bearers were equipped with iron shields forged from fine iron. In addition, they also had 10 iron carriages that could be moved at any time. Although they were too cumbersome and moved a little slowly to an ordinary army, they could be considered as having a body of diamond and were difficult to break through. After Su Yunsheng finished speaking, he saluted Yang Qindong and took a step back. It was time to keep a low profile and do things in a low-key manner. Chapter 5:16. Following Su Yunsheng's detailed explanation of the enemy's strength, the officers below began to whisper to each other. For example, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin were exchanging opinions with their subordinates from time to time. Obviously, they were already considering how to fight. After allowing the officers to discuss for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Yang Qindong put down the teacup in his hand and calmly sat down on the chair. How is it? Does anyone have any good ideas? In ancient times, when a general went to war, he would usually discuss with a few of his close subordinates before deciding on the battle plan. After gathering everyone together, he would immediately announce the battle plan. This was the fastest way to achieve results. Otherwise, if he really gathered all the Kiliarchs and Centurions together for a discussion, it would be difficult to achieve any results. Furthermore, the ancient army seemed to be used to obeying orders. Usually, whatever the higher-ups said, the subordinates would act accordingly. If they were really asked to come up with ideas or use their brains, most of them would be uncultured people. They wouldn't be able to come up with any good ideas and would only spoil the situation. In Yang Qindong's case, he really wanted to break this habit. What he wanted was for everyone to participate. He wanted everyone to get used to using their brains in battle. It didn't matter if they were right or wrong. After all, they still needed democratic centralism. As long as the commanders didn't make any mistakes, it would be fine. They were already used to Yang Qindong's style. When they were asked if they had any ideas, the officers began to express their opinions. "Chief, I think we should pick on the weaker ones and attack the Liaoting tribe of the Lansang kingdom first." "No, with our strength, how can we bully the weak and fear the strong? We should deal with the Jiaoji army first." Yes, as long as we scare the Jiaoji army, that Lati won't be a problem. He would probably run away with his tail between his legs. The third person's voice was quickly followed by a burst of laughter from the other officers. The atmosphere became much more lively. But in general, the difference in opinion was whether to attack the Jiaoji army or the Liaoting tribe first. After all, although the mercenaries had advanced firearms, there were too few of them. It was unrealistic for them to fight both of them at once. Yang Qindong looked like he was seriously listening to their opinions. After the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn, most of the officers below had expressed their opinions, and the voices of discussion had quieted down. He cleared his throat and turned to look at Cold Front 2nd Battalion's Battalion Commander Chen. "Bo, Battalion Commander Chen, I didn't see you say anything earlier. What do you think?" Chen Bo, whose name was called, stood up from his seat. His eyes were not focused. Obviously, he was still thinking about the problem. Chen Bo was called Confucian General by Yang Qindong. This was because he was different from the other officers in terms of height and strength. Although he was not tall, he had more of a scholarly air and less of a valiant aura. Perhaps this had something to do with his love of reading. Because he loved reading, he liked to think more when he encountered problems. He was always willing to ask more questions or make more hypotheses. Just like earlier, he was constantly making hypotheses until Yang Qindong called him to stand up. Then, His thoughts started to come together. Sixth young master, if it were up to me, I would prefer to beat the Liaoting tribe into submission first. After all, it shouldn't be too difficult to deal with them. Otherwise, we won't be able to deal with the Jiaoji army with our full strength. Also, we won't be able to get used to having someone watching us from behind. Then, do you have any ideas? Looking at Chun Bo, Yang Chendong had an intuition that he should have thought of a plan to retreat. As expected, Chun Bo quickly nodded his head and said, "Sixth young master, this is what I think. Since they took the initiative to become enemies with us mercenaries, it's not enough to just teach them a lesson. Instead, we should completely defeat them. It would be best if we could wipe them all out and let them remember this lesson. From then on, whenever we mention the name of mercenaries, they would feel their entire body tremble. Only this way can we warn the future generations and let them know what kind of attitude they should maintain when facing us again." After Chen Bo said these words, it gave Yang Chendong a feeling that he was planning something big. It was not difficult for him to be curious and said, "Go on. Sixth young master, what do you think? Isn't the Navy attacking Sunan County from Jiaojin County? I heard that the progress is very smooth. Then, can you let them make a stance? Let's make it look like they are marching towards the Lansang Kingdom from the Changshan mountain range. We just need to make a big commotion. Presumably, if the commotion is enough, they will definitely return to their country for the sake of their own safety. At that time, we can attack them halfway and achieve twice the result with half the effort." Taking the initiative to walk in front of the sand table, Chun Bo explained his idea in detail. Then he looked at Yang Chendong with an expectant look. Yang Chendong was also interested in Chun Bo's idea. To be honest, it's only 100,000 Laotian soldiers. They don't really pose a threat to Yang Chendong. If he really needs to pacify the Jiaoji army, he can just lead the army to the west. It won't be difficult to kill the Laotian soldiers. So what he wants to do is to intercept the Laotian soldiers halfway and deal with them. But if he really does that, the most he can do is to chase them away. If he wants to hurt them, it will be a bit difficult. On the contrary, Chun Bo's plan was completely different. First, he would mobilize them, and then intercept them when they had no choice but to retreat. In this way, it was possible to achieve the possibility of seriously injuring the enemy or even annihilating the enemy. Moreover, by waiting for the exhausted enemy to arrive, the price to pay would only be smaller. As for the need to mobilize the Navy, that is even less of a problem. Didn't Chun Bo just say it? They just need to make a commotion. There is no need to really send out troops. Okay, I will leave this matter to the 2nd Battalion. How many troops do you need? Yang Chendong quickly made a decision. This is how a commander is. Being indecisive will often lead to chaos. Moreover, even if this plan doesn't work, he won't lose anything. He will just treat it as a long-range training for the army. Seeing that Yang Chendong agreed, Chun Bo was also very excited. Previously, when the 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin took down the capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi, he was very envious. Although he also took down Beidai City, it was a defenseless city compared to Kong Chuanxin. He didn't even fire a few shots. The sense of accomplishment was too small. But if he can take down 100,000 Laotian soldiers, it will be completely different. That will be a real military merit. 6th young master, if possible, other than the 2nd Battalion, I would like to mobilize 2 auxiliary battalions, 5 temporary auxiliary battalions, and 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries. After saying this, Chun Bo also purposely explained, I want to take down all 100,000 Laotian soldiers. If the number is too small, I am afraid that I can only defeat and cripple them, but not all of them. Approved. Yang Chendong nodded decisively. Chun Bo's request was not low, but it also proved his confidence. just as he said if they wanted to take down 100,000 Laotian soldiers. It would be impossible if the number was too small. Thank you, sixth young master. Don't worry. If I can't take down 100,000 Laotian soldiers this time, I will start from scratch, seeing how much young Qindong trusted him. Qinbo said emotionally. He was probably the first person other than Yang Qindong to lead 10,000 Laotian soldiers to battle, so it was normal for him to be emotional. With Qinbo's promise, the other officers who wanted to fight for a chance all shut their mouths. This was especially true for 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. He didn't want to fall behind others. Since 2nd Battalion Commander Qin Bo could do this well, why couldn't he? Although he didn't quite understand the specific battle plan of the other party, as long as he had the idea, he could study the details later. However, all of this changed after hearing Qinbo's promise. Compared to Qinbo's courage and willingness to stake everything on a single throw, Kong Chuanxin was much less confident. With the plan to deal with the 100,000 Laotian soldiers, the following meeting was much simpler. Yang Qindong announced that other than leaving behind 2,000 Jiaoji mercenaries and 1 auxiliary camp to defend Hanoi City, the rest of the 20,000-plus troops would set out for Shiyu City the next morning. He wanted to make a show of an all-out attack, luring the 100,000 Laotian troops under Rithi, so to send out their troops. After the meeting, Recon Company Commander Su Changsheng sent out scouts towards Renan Prefecture, informing Nie Tong to send out a portion of his men to cross the Changshan Mountains and attack the Lansong Kingdom. After resting for 8 days, the mercenaries left from the north gate of Hanoi City, with renewed vigor the next morning. They headed straight for Shiyu City, which was less than 200 miles away. The commander was naturally Yang Qindong. Beside him was the 2nd Regiment commander of Lungfeng, Luo Pu. However, this regiment commander was a little pitiful, as he only had a 3rd Battalion, a regiment commander, and a regiment commander left. Even so, they were still the main force. Following Yang Qindong towards Shiyu City were 7 auxiliary battalions and 7 temporary battalions, as well as 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries. The 25,000-strong army marched out of the city. Soon, their whereabouts were known by the Jiaoji scouts stationed nearby. The news spread like wildfire across the land of Jiaoji. A war to defend and a war to wipe out a nation was about to begin. On the same night that Yang Qindong led the army out of the north gate, the west gate of Hanoi City opened from the inside. Qinbo brought his 2nd Battalion, 2 auxiliary battalions, 5 temporary battalions, and 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries, led by General Hong Jin, out of the city, disappearing into the darkness. In order to complete the mission better, Qinbo requested for General Hong Jin to come over. After all, the 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries had played a huge role in keeping the 100,000 Laotian soldiers in Jiaoji. If they did not have a good commander, how could they succeed? Chapter 5:17. Shiyu City. The news of the mercenary army leaving the city had already reached here. King Li, who had regained his power, called for an emergency meeting. He called all the officials before him to discuss the strategy of retreating the enemy. Around 25,000 people, they increased the number of troops again. After hearing the report of the number of enemy troops, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was the first to lose his composure and asked this question. It was no wonder that he was so surprised. Previously, the news said that the mercenary army was only around 10,000. Now that there was an increase of nearly half, it was reasonable for him to be surprised. This was the disadvantage of having outdated information. Ever since they gave up on Hanoi City, there was no more news about it. Many of the spies that were left in the city were dug out. There were some who were lucky enough not to be discovered and were sent out of Hanoi City. They went to the seaside and went straight to Ryukyu Island. They became miserable spies that couldn't be helped no matter how much they cried. Without internal information, they naturally didn't know that Hong Jin had formed a Jiaoji mercenary army of 30,000 people. In fact, it wasn't just Crown Prince Li Yuanlong who was shocked. The other officials were also shocked. The 10,000 mercenary army was already a headache for them. They even lost the capital. Now that the mercenary army had doubled in strength, how were they going to deal with it? On the other hand, although King Lily was shocked, he didn't show it on his face. After all, he was the king of a country. If he panicked, then wouldn't the rest of the country be in chaos? What are you panicking for? Seeing the panic on the faces of the officials, even Crown Prince Li Yuanlong wasn't as calm as before. Li Li's face was dark as he spoke. When everyone's gazes turned to him, he calmly said, "How about this? Immediately send someone to inform General Lati. Tell them to move closer to us. If possible, bite the tail of the mercenary army. When the time is right, we will launch a pincer attack. By the way, tell him to be careful and not to be targeted by others." The king is wise. When the officials heard that they were going to ally with General Lati, they all relaxed. That's right. Didn't they have reinforcements? In total, there were 350,000 soldiers. Compared to the 20,000 mercenaries, they had a 20 times advantage in terms of numbers. Furthermore, they were on the defensive. It seemed that there was no possibility of them losing. Some of the civil and military officials felt much more at ease after hearing the king's words. However, there were still some people who were terrified. This included the crown prince, Li Yuanlong. In the past, he had been able to act calmly and unhurriedly because he had the Jiuzhen County as his foundation. As long as the Jiuzhen County was not in chaos, he would have an escape route and reinforcements. But now, even that place was occupied by the mercenaries. He had lost his foundation. A crown prince without a foundation would lack confidence in whatever he did. The news of the mercenaries suddenly leaving Hanoi City and heading straight for Shiyu City naturally reached the ears of General Lati of the Lansong Kingdom in a very short time. Since he had arrived in Jiaoji, Rithi was prepared to fight the mercenaries. Seeing that everything was happening as he had expected, he began to mobilize and gather his troops before the battle. The distance from Shiyu City to Yinglu City, where Rithi was located, was less than 400 li. Soon, the scouts sent by the king of Lily arrived. After receiving the signal from the king of Jiaoji, Rithi led 95,000 soldiers out of Yinglu City and rushed behind the mercenaries. He left 5,000 soldiers to guard Yinglu City. In addition, there were 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers in the city. There should not be any problems guarding the city. Rithi even hoped that someone would attack the city. That way, he could quickly return and launch a pincer attack from both the inside and outside of the city to teach the mercenaries a lesson. However, what he did not expect was that the mercenaries had no intention of attacking the city. Yang Chendong had said more than once that if you keep the people and lose the land, you would gain the people and the land. If you keep the land, you would lose the people and the land. According to Yang Chendong, the main goal was to eliminate the enemy's strength. As long as the main army of Jiaoji was eliminated, the cities could not be moved. Wouldn't that mean that the mercenaries could occupy the cities whenever they wanted? Rithi led the army out of the city. However, the marching speed was not very fast. It was only about 20 li a day. This way, they could better maintain the discipline of the troops, with the front and rear looking after each other. If any of the troops were attacked, they could ensure that they would rush to the rescue as quickly as possible. The 5,000 cavalrymen under his command were used as a rapid response force. Of course, the reason why they were so slow was because of the news from the front. The 20,000 mercenaries did not attack immediately after arriving at Shiyu City. Instead, they stopped 10 li outside of the city and looked like they were in a standoff. Although Rethi did not understand why the mercenaries did not attack immediately, he did not think too much about it. In his opinion, this was his chance. Once he could successfully move behind the mercenaries, it would be time for him to work with the Jiaoji army to launch a pincer attack. He didn't believe that with over 300,000 soldiers pressing down, and with the front and rear attacking together, the other side's 20,000 soldiers could do anything. It could be said that until now, neither King Li nor General Rithi suspected that the mercenaries had split up. They did not know that the Jiaoji mercenaries alone accounted for 18,000 of the 20,000 mercenaries. At the same time, the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, Nie Tong, received the order and led 2 battalions of soldiers towards the Changshan mountain range. Although there were not many soldiers, in order to create enough momentum, each squad raised a sun and moon flag of the great Ming dynasty. From afar, it looked like the flags were fluttering in the wind and the morale was high. The discovery of the mercenaries in the east of the Lansong Kingdom frightened the king of the Lansong Kingdom, Paiyasai. Paiyasai inherited his father's position and became the new king of Lansong Kingdom. Under his rule, the kingdom was considered stable. However, because the territory was too small, they could not find a good opportunity to expand. When the mercenaries suddenly appeared in Jiaoji, they took note of it. After all, Jiaoji was their neighbor, and their territory was not small. It had always been one of the goals that the Lansong Kingdom wanted to expand. Originally, they wanted to wait for the Jiaoji army and the mercenaries to fight to the point where both sides were heavily injured before they made a move. However, they did not expect that the small mercenaries would be so powerful and win consecutive battles. In the end, the Jiaoji army even lost their kingdom. If the two sides were evenly matched, a third party might have a chance. However, when one side could only take a beating, there would not be a chance to take advantage of the situation. Just as King Paiyasai was having a headache about how the mercenaries were so strong, King Li's messenger arrived. He even brought a letter from the king of Jiaoji asking for help. In the letter, King Li first expressed his sincere greetings to King Paiyasai, and then pointed out that the situation in Jiaoji was not going well. He requested that the Lansong Kingdom send troops to help out on account of the fact that they had been neighbors for generations. He also promised that after the war, he would give the 3 prefectures to the Lansong Kingdom. At the same time, he also said that the mercenaries were too strong. If they were not restrained, they would deal with the Lansong Kingdom the same way they dealt with the Jiaoji Kingdom today. This was the logic behind the saying, "When the lips are cold, the teeth will die." King Li's words made sense. In addition, the 3 prefectures could be given to the Lansong Kingdom. This was a good thing for the development of the Lansong Kingdom. Of course, the most important thing was that he did not have a clear understanding of the mercenary strength. A flintlock? This sounded very powerful. King Paiyasai, who had seen them before, started to look down on them. In his opinion, Jiaoji was the strength of a kingdom. It was impossible to conquer it with just 10,000 mercenaries. As time passed, they might even solve the problem themselves. If that was the case, the benefits of the 3 prefectures would be lost. Completely ignoring the word advanced in firearms, Paiyasai made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. He agreed to send 100,000 soldiers to support Jiaoji. Previously, the war happened within the borders of Jiaoji. No matter how intense the war was, King Paiyasai did not have any direct knowledge of it until he suddenly received news that the mercenaries had entered from the Long Mountain Range and were heading straight for the capital, Wanxiang City. Furthermore, there was news from the front lines that a border patrol of 500 people encountered the mercenaries. However, in just one encounter, they were defeated and left behind 300 corpses. All of this was Commander Niatong's idea. In order to make the Lan Tsang kingdom afraid, not only did they have to advance with great fanfare, they also had to fight at least 2 battles. Although the navy could display their strength on the sea, this did not stop them from dealing with small groups of enemies on land. Just like this Lan Tsang Kingdom Patrol team, they were unlucky enough to become the target of the 2 cold front battalions. Under the 95 styles rotating guns, how could 500 people be a match? The sudden appearance of the mercenaries caused the upper echelons of the Lan Tsang Kingdom to panic. Thinking that it was better to die than to die, King Payasai ordered General Lati to lead the troops back to the kingdom. The Lan Tsang Kingdom's army of 95,000 people had advanced for 5 days. Initially, they were worried that the mercenaries would appear to intercept them. But now, they had advanced for 100 miles without encountering any enemies. General Lati's alertness was constantly decreasing. He even began to consider whether he could speed up the march and attack the mercenaries with the Jiaoji army. Suddenly, the king's order arrived. Chapter 5:18. Seeing the letter in the messenger's hand, King Payasai's handwritten letter, King Lati only hesitated for a moment before deciding to lead his troops back to the country. Even though helping Jiaoji win the war was a great achievement, if the Lan Tsang kingdom was severely damaged, all of his achievements would become a stain on his reputation. Worse still, the old dragon tribe would take this opportunity to make things difficult for him. General Lati, who didn't want to give anyone a chance to criticize him, quickly ordered his troops to turn around and retreat. He didn't even inform Jiaoji. It was clear how anxious he was. Compared to the 20 miles a day they traveled on the way to Yinglu City, the speed of the army was much faster. After all, no one knew what would happen to the Lan Tsang kingdom if they delayed for another day. Perhaps the mercenaries had already clashed with the kingdom's army. While General Lati was leading his troops back, in a place called the Wuha Forest, mines were being watered by the summer rain. In the dense forest of the Wuha Forest, the troops of the 2nd Battalion commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment, Chunbo, were hidden. 3 days ago, he led more than 10,000 soldiers to this place. After choosing this place as the ambush location, they began digging the mines intensively. In a short period of time, countless deep holes were dug on both sides of the road to place a total of 3,000 mines. In less than half a day, the mines were successfully placed. Next, everyone returned to their respective positions. Along the Wulin River, the 10,000 soldiers hid themselves and began a long wait. They brought with them 10 days' worth of rations, which mainly consisted of instant noodles, ham sausages, and various canned food. Every soldier was either eating or sleeping. It was a leisurely scene. However, as the commander, Chun Bo found it difficult to truly sleep soundly. From time to time, he would look into the distance to see if the scouts had sent back any new information. "It's raining." In the dense forest, someone called out softly. Then, Chun Bo raised his head and looked at the sky. What he saw was a drizzle falling from the sky. "Okay." Chun Bo couldn't help but clench his fists in excitement as he watched the drizzle fall on the trees and drip onto himself. Previously, he was still worried that he would leave some traces behind when he buried the mines and be discovered by others. But now that the rain was falling from the sky, everything was no longer a problem. This would be the best cover. In such weather, even the best scout would find it difficult to discover any problems. Not long after the light rain fell, a figure in the distance was rapidly approaching the dense forest. The person who came was the scout that was sent out. With his return, he also brought the latest news, which was that Lati had returned with 100,000 troops. This damn weather. Riding on the horse and looking up at the sky, Rithi couldn't help but curse. It was no wonder that Lati was so angry. One could tell just by looking at the morale of the army. Originally, The nearly 100,000 soldiers were still holding their heads high and wanted to show off their might. But now they were suddenly ordered to turn back. This was a very discouraging thing to begin with. But then it started to drizzle. Although it wasn't very heavy, after a long time, the soldiers' clothes were soaked. The sticky feeling was very uncomfortable. The road also became muddy with the continuous drizzle. Every step they took was heavier than usual. This feeling made them feel even more uncomfortable. The morale of the entire army became much lower because of this. From afar, the army that was walking with their heads lowered would curse from time to time. They all looked like they were blaming the heavens and blaming others. However, even though the morale of the army was low, General Lottie couldn't do anything under such weather and such orders. Even if he was a great orator, he wouldn't be able to raise the morale of the army at this moment. He just hoped that they could quickly reach Inglu City, enter the city, change into dry clothes, eat hot food, and have a good sleep. Perhaps they would feel much better after that. All troops speed up and try to enter the city to rest at night. Thinking that they were less than 40 miles away from Inglu City, Lottie made up his mind and gritted his teeth as he spoke to his subordinates. Soon, the order was passed down. Although they hadn't had a good rest since the beginning of the return journey, the soldiers didn't complain too much when they thought about how they could have a good sleep after entering the city. Instead, they sped up silently. At this moment, no one thought about whether they would encounter an ambush. After all, they didn't see a single enemy on the way here. Now that they were about to return to the city, they were only 40 miles away from Inglu City. In addition, the weather was bad, and the sky was gradually darkening. Who would attack them at this time? Just like how it was very strenuous for them to walk, wouldn't it be the same for the enemy who wanted to attack them? It was precisely because of this misconception that the nearly 100,000 troops didn't have the slightest awareness of being on guard. On the contrary, because of the rain, the distance between the front, middle, and rear of the army was increasing. The sky slowly darkened. Perhaps it was because of the rain, but the sky was much darker than usual. It also made people feel very vexed. However, all of this didn't affect the mercenaries much. They were originally hiding in the rainforest, and the trees above them had blocked much of the wind and rain for them. In addition, they had been sleeping the entire day apart from eating, so everyone was in good spirits. At this moment, this group of elite soldiers was staring at the approaching Lan-Tsang army. Even though the front of their army had already walked past them, not a single soldier had the intention to charge out and fight. Even the 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries didn't dare to make a single sound under the strict orders of General Hong Jin. It was as if they were afraid of causing a commotion and angering the mercenaries who killed without batting an eyelid. Not to mention, before the battle, the mercenary battalion commander Chun Bo had said that as long as everyone followed the rules after the battle was over, all the soldiers who participated in the battle would be rewarded with at least 20 taels of silver, regardless of whether they had contributed or not. 20 taels of silver was equivalent to the annual income of an ordinary family in Jiaoji. With such a reward in front of them, everyone was naturally as obedient as they could be. Naturally, only rich mercenaries would be able to casually pay out 200,000 taels of silver without feeling the slightest bit of heartache. The darkness continued. Half of the Lan-Tsang army had already passed through the Wuhe forest, including the 5,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 archers. They were the main force and soul of this army of close to 100,000 men. Everyone get ready. Through the night vision binoculars in his hands, he could clearly see the front of the army. He saw that the 5,000 cavalrymen were about to walk into a muddy area. In reality, there was a deep trench there. It was the best weapon to use against cavalrymen. As the commander, Chun Bo raised his right hand high into the air. Although the sky was a little dark, the raised right hand was still seen by many people. Their breathing became tense at this moment. Then they focused their attention and waited for the hand to fall. Then they would launch a fierce attack. The so-called attack was just shooting from a distance. According to Battalion Commander Chunbo's plan, they could not fight the enemy head-on in this battle. They only needed to shoot from a short distance to cause chaos in the enemy army. Then they would step on landmines to increase the chaos. As long as the enemy's morale was completely suppressed, then it would be time for them to clean up the mess. General La Ti, who was unaware of all this, was still riding on his horse and moving forward. As a general, he arrogantly walked at the front. However, he did not know that his actions, which seemed like he was leading by example, was actually a catalyst to the death of nearly 100,000 soldiers. After all, if he, the main general, did not get into trouble immediately, the morale of the soldiers would not have fallen to the lowest point in such a short period of time. Bang! The trench, which was nearly 6 meters deep and 8 meters wide, collapsed. Before the cavalrymen in the first row could figure out what was going on, they fell one by one into the trench like dumplings. Next was the second row. General La Ti was in this row. He only felt that the cavalrymen in front of him had suddenly disappeared. Then his body tilted and fell into the trench with a plop. Then it was the third row. The fourth row, fortunately, the trench had a limited capacity. Otherwise, at least hundreds of cavalrymen would have fallen into the trench and lost their ability to fight. However, even if only a few hundred people fell into the trench, the consequences were considerable. This was because their commanding general and several captains beside him had fallen into the trench together. At this moment, they were still pressed down by the cavalrymen and horses that fell into the trench. It was impossible for them to move in a short period of time. Just as this chaos was about to break out, a dazzling light suddenly shot up into the sky. A very bright red signal flare streaked across the dark night sky. At this moment, the horn that signaled the beginning of the battle had been blown. Tut, tut, tut. Bam, bam, bam. Bam, bam, bam. Gunshots rang out in all directions. Sparks from the muzzles suddenly appeared in all directions, dealing a fatal blow to the soldiers of the Lansang kingdom, who were in a hurry to move forward. No one would have thought that there would be enemies here. No one would have thought that they would be ambushed here. No one would have thought that the attack would be so sudden and fierce. Originally, the Wuha forest was on both sides of the road. The distance in a straight line was only about 500 meters. When all kinds of bullets flew over, and when people suddenly fell to the ground in the rainy night, the army was in chaos. Chapter 5:19. It seemed to be an instinct. When people encountered an emergency, their first thought was to run. If they had to describe it, they would have to add a word in front of the word run. Chaos. That's right, they were running around. Perhaps this was the only way they could feel at ease. As long as they kept moving, they would feel safer and know that they were still alive. However, they did not know that there were 3,000 landmines buried around them. Although the number was not considered a lot, it was much less than the 10,000 landmines that Yang Qindong buried in the Liangshan rainforest to deal with Wanyongyang. However, it was in the middle of the night, and under the sudden attack, when one of the 3,000 scattered landmines was stepped on, the shock it brought was also very strong. Boom, 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 boom. The explosions were incessant, flames were everywhere, blood was flowing everywhere, and corpses were scattered everywhere. When all these scenes appeared, it was like a purgatory on earth. Human lives became the most worthless existence. One of the captains who was lucky enough not to be affected by the war, under the premise that he could not find General La Ti, acted like an ostrich under the protection of his bodyguards while he sent people to Inglu City, which was 40 miles away, to ask for reinforcements. In terms of numbers, there were more soldiers here. However, anyone could see that under the sudden attack, their morale was low, and their morale was low. There was no way they could win a battle with such an army. If reinforcements could appear, it might be like a cardiac stimulant, raising the morale of these soldiers and turning the situation around. Those who could become 10,000 men commanders were no fools. Thinking back to the news that they had received, the mercenaries had dispatched troops from the Long Mountain Range and headed to Shiyu City to confront the Jiaoji Kingdom's army. It was unlikely that they would have many enemies after splitting up their forces. Perhaps they still had a chance to turn the tables. However, what the major didn't know was that his actions weren't salvaging the situation. Instead, he was destroying the last bit of hope that he had. The war was still going on. Under the continuous drizzle, there were still many Lansang Kingdom soldiers who were hit and fell to the ground, losing their lives. From time to time, there would be people who stepped on landmines out of fear. Not only did they pay with their own lives, but they also caused their comrades to be sacrificed. In such a chaotic situation, it seemed that there were enemies everywhere, and nowhere was safe. Even the 5,000 so-called elite godly archers did not have the slightest bit of combat prowess in the face of such a situation. In the darkness, they could only see tongues of fire shooting out from all around them, but they couldn't see where the enemy was. Every time they wanted to walk over to take a look, bullets would shoot through their bodies before they could even get close, causing them to fall one by one. After a few more rounds, and after throwing down nearly 500 corpses, they became much more obedient. They no longer dared to recklessly probe anything. Instead, they changed from standing to lying down. This was because they discovered that once they did so, their safety was much more guaranteed. This was because the bullets from the muskets wouldn't take care of them. This discovery gave more of the Lansang Kingdom's soldiers hope of survival. Therefore, in less than an hour, all the soldiers who were still alive changed from standing to lying down. Because of this, the outside environment became much quieter than before. Unless there was someone who didn't have eyes and wanted to escape, only then would there be a few gunshots. Otherwise, it was very quiet most of the time, although it wasn't good to lie down on the ground at this time, and many of them were even soaked by the rain and water, but compared to losing their lives, this was of course a very good result. Battalion commander, they are all lying down and not moving. Feeling that the swaying figures in their line of sight began to decrease until there were almost none, an officer reported to Chinbo, "Very good. Isn't this what we want to see? Tell the soldiers, don't waste bullets. As long as they don't move, we won't move either. When dawn comes, it will be time to reap the fruits of victory. Now it's up to Chunyang and Sergeant Su." Chunbo said calmly, but if one listened carefully, one could hear the sense of relief in his tone. Although the plan was very thorough, and they had set up an ambush here 3 days in advance. But before seeing the results, his heart had been hanging in the air. Now that there was finally a result, and it was a very good result, it was no wonder that his mood was much more relaxed. Inglu City, as the temporary resting place of the Lansang Kingdom's reinforcements, this place was very safe. Even though General Lati had led the troops out, there were still 5,000 Lansang soldiers and 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers. A city with less than 40,000 permanent residents actually had 7,000 soldiers. This ratio was already very high. This made it so that the residents here were not too affected by the battle outside. Even if there was news that the Jiaoji Kingdom's capital had been taken over by the mercenary army, it was the same. This was because there was also news that King Li was mobilizing a large number of troops to counterattack. Adding on the fact that 100,000 Lansang soldiers were stationed in this city, there was nothing to be afraid of. Not to mention that the mercenary army only had around 10,000 people. Since the residents were not afraid, the soldiers were even more so. Especially after General Lati led the 95,000-strong army to battle, the 7,000 soldiers who stayed behind to guard the city were living like the masters of the city. Other than closing the city gates to prevent accidents, they had been eating and sleeping for the past few days. Occasionally, they would gather together to gamble. Life was not too good. In actuality, the 5,000 people who stayed behind did not have much battle strength, and they were the weakest of the 100,000 people. As such, they did not have any military discipline. They all knew that the other soldiers had gone with the general to do meritorious deeds, and only they stayed behind. They were people who had been abandoned, and since it was like this, they decided to go all out. Adding on the fact that it had been raining for the past few days, they could drink some wine, sleep some well, and gamble some money. However, this good life was quickly disrupted. News came from the front lines that because the mercenary army had suddenly attacked the Lansang kingdom, General Lati would no longer help the Jiaoji kingdom and would instead go back to help his own kingdom. Moreover, he might return to the city today. So wouldn't their good days be over? Since the general was coming back, the soldiers put away their playful attitude, cleaned the barracks, and prepared food. For the entire day, the 5,000 people were very busy. Just when they were almost done with their preparations, a cavalryman suddenly arrived at the city gate with an unbelievable piece of news. General Lati and nearly 100,000 soldiers had been ambushed and suffered heavy losses. When the news came out, many people were in disbelief. If the cavalryman who came was not a Chiliarch, and he was indeed one of their own, some of the soldiers would have doubted the authenticity of this news. Hurry up, the army is still fighting with the enemy, and we need your help now. The Chiliarch shouted at the top of the city gates. As if he was afraid that these people would delay the battle, he even shouted, "Weren't you guys regretting that you couldn't go with the army and get military merits? Now that the merits are in front of you, do you dare to fight for it?" The Chiliarch was still shouting, using his own method to provoke the 5,000 soldiers who stayed behind to guard the city. About 200 meters away from him, a few figures were lying on the ground, watching everything closely. Although it was still raining and the ground was already muddy, there were still mosquitoes flying around. Sometimes there would even be some mosquitoes flying around in front of their faces, looking for opportunities to bite them from time to time. However, these black shadows just lay there motionless like statues. To be able to not be affected by external factors, to have such iron discipline, who else could they be but the most elite soldiers of the Cold Vanguard Army? In fact, there were at least 200 of these black figures on the ground outside Yinglu City's East Gate. They were formed by the scouts of the 2nd Regiment and the 1st Company of the 2nd Battalion. They arrived when the sky turned dark. Under the cover of the rainy night, they crawled slowly to the city gates and then found a good place to hide. At the place closest to the East Gate, the few figures lying on the ground were the commanders of these 200 men. They were the Scouts Commander Su Yunsheng and the 2nd Battalion's 1st Company's Commander Chun Yang. The order they received was to take down Yinglu City and wipe out the 7,000 enemies in the city. Since Chun Bo had made a military order in front of Yang Qindong, saying that he was going to wipe out the 100,000 soldiers of the Lansang kingdom, then the 5,000 Lansang soldiers guarding the city naturally had to be wiped out. Otherwise, wouldn't it be imperfect? However, the disparity between 200 and 7,000 was still a little too great. In order to complete this mission, Chun Bo gave the 2nd Battalion's 2 rocket launchers to the 1st Company's Commander Chun Yang, as well as 2 squads' machine guns. These were the treasures of the 2nd Battalion, and only the most elite Cold Vanguard Army was given such good stuff. Now that they were all given to the 1st Company, this was the only thing that Chun Pai could support them in. when the 2 rocket launchers and 2 squads machine guns were in his hands, Chun Yang also made a military order in front of Chun Bo, guaranteeing that he would complete the mission. Speaking of which, the 200 of them only had to face the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers in Yinglu City. With such firepower, this mission wasn't that hard to complete. At this moment, Company Commander Chun Yang and Company Commander Su Yunsheng were discussing the battle plan below the city gate tower. Chapter 5:20. Even though they were all company commanders, they seemed to be of the same rank. However, because Su Yunsheng was a scout company commander directly under the regiment, his name was even registered with the 6th Young Master. In comparison, Chun Yang, the company commander of the main force, was half a level lower. Because of this, Chun Yang spoke in a negotiating tone. Company Commander Su, do you think we should first take control of the East Gate, then quickly take down the Jiaoji general's residence? I think so. After thinking for a moment, Su Yunsheng nodded and added, I'll leave the East Gate and the general's residence to your company. I'll take the scout company to take control of the north, west, and south gates. We'll try to take control of the entire city in the shortest amount of time. Chun Yang was waiting for this sentence. He immediately said to Su Yunsheng with a face full of gratitude, Thank you, Company Commander Su. AI, no need to be so polite. We're all completing our mission. Su Yunsheng smiled and said in a low voice, The city gate is open. Yinglu City's east gate was indeed open. After this chilly arch arrived on horseback and explained the situation, the 5,000 Lansang soldiers in the city finally decided to come out and help. Speaking of which, they were all from the Liaoting tribe. Many of the soldiers were related by blood. They definitely wouldn't leave their loved ones in danger. The 5,000-man troop was a long line in the darkness. From the moment they left the city to the moment they all walked out of the city, it took them more than an hour. When the last batch of Lansang soldiers walked out of the city gate, the dozen or so Jiaoji soldiers in charge of security prepared to close the city gate. However, these people had no idea that their lives had already begun the countdown. The moment they pushed the city gates with all their might, wanting to close them, over 10 black figures jumped out from behind them. It was as if they had appeared out of thin air. Then a cold light flashed, and streams of blood gushed out. Then, over 10 people slowly fell to the ground. The scouts acted. They were already prepared and quickly took care of the Jiaoji soldiers who were trying to close the city gate. Then, 2 companies of elites rushed out of the East Gate to the key locations in Yinglu City. No one would have thought that the mercenaries would attack Yinglu City in the middle of the night. Most of the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers in the city had taken off their uniforms and were preparing to rest. But then, several gunshots rang out from outside. There's a situation. The gunshots startled the Jiaoji soldiers, and they hurriedly put on their clothes. Then, they grabbed their weapons and tried to rush out of the camp. Those who ran faster became the first batch of soldiers to walk out of the barracks. There were many figures in the dark. Then, torches were lit one after another. However, before they could illuminate the dark night, a series of rapid gunshots were heard. This was the sound of the squad's machine gun firing. This kind of gun that could fire 600 bullets in a minute was like a divine weapon in this era. Once he took it out, he would definitely be able to kill in all directions, and it would be difficult for him to find a worthy opponent. A series of gunshots rang out, and the first batch of Jiaoji soldiers fell into a pool of blood. Even when they were dying, they didn't understand what had happened. The dozens of Jiaoji soldiers who died were like role models, causing the other Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to rush out to stop. They were all frightened by the scene in front of them. This fear made them lose the courage to rush out of the camp, and they didn't even have the strength to light the torches. There were at least 1,500 Jiaoji soldiers in the camp. When they were scared into staying in the camp and didn't dare to come out, the matters outside were much easier to handle. Other than the 2 Lung Feng platoons who stayed outside the camp, Chang Chunyang led the remaining platoon of soldiers and charged into the general's residence. The gunshots outside caused the gates of the general's residence to be tightly shut from the inside. General Yinglu's shouting could be heard from the inside. However, the tightly shut door was no different from a piece of paper in Lung Feng's eyes. He saw Captain Chunyang reach out and take the rocket launcher from a soldier. Then, with a loud bang, the tightly shut door was blown apart. The Jiaoji soldiers who were using their bodies to push against the door were sent flying. A few of them had already closed their eyes and stopped breathing while they were flying. Charge! After the door was blasted open, Chunyang pointed his hand forward, and the valiant Cold Vanguard soldiers entered in a single file. A series of gunshots rang out, and in less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the general's residence was captured. Even General Yinglu had become a corpse on the ground. If the general's residence was opened by brute force, then the Jiaoji soldiers on the western, southern, and northern city towers were beaten into submission by a roll call. To be able to become a scout, not only were they physically strong, their observation skills were also top-notch. Their training had taught them what it meant to protect themselves and attack the enemy at the same time. Therefore, they understood the value of life. When Company Commander Su Yunsheng gave the order to the 3 platoons to attack freely, they actually chose the same method. They didn't attack the city towers, and only occupied the city gates. Not attacking the city towers meant that they didn't want to put themselves in danger. It could also be said that there was no need to take the risk. Their mission was only to control the 3 city gates. Since that was the case, they only needed to prevent the Jiaoji soldiers from coming down. Therefore, when they arrived at the city gates, the Jiaoji soldiers with torches became their targets. Every time a gunshot rang out, a figure would fall to the ground. After a dozen Jiaoji soldiers with torches were killed, the other Jiaoji soldiers learned their lesson. They extinguished the torches in their hands and found a corner to hide. The strength of the mercenaries had completely frightened them. At this moment, not to mention rushing down the city gates, they didn't even have the courage to stand up and check the situation. The 3 city gates fell into the hands of the scout company. Just like that, as the 4 city gates, the general's residence, and the barracks were controlled, the Lung Feng platoons and the scout company had basically taken control of the entire Yinglu city. The 5,000 Lansang reinforcements who were completely unaware of all this were still rushing forward with all their might. As they got further and further away from Yinglu city, as they got closer and closer to the place where General Lati was ambushed, sporadic, and light gunshots finally entered their ears. Quick, it's right in front. The Chili Arch who reported the news pointed at the battlefield 2 to 3 li away and shouted loudly, "The enemy's reinforcements are here." In the dense forest, the 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo used his night vision binoculars and saw this scene. He then said to the messenger beside him, "Inform the 2nd Company to open up an opening and let these people in. Tell them they are allowed to enter, but not leave. If one escapes, I will punish him." "Yes, Battalion Commander." The correspondent replied before turning around and running out. Not long after, the 2nd Company opened up an opening, and the 5,000 Lansang soldiers charged into the encirclement. At the same time, they stepped into the gates of hell. Why is it so quiet? The moment they entered, the 5,000 reinforcements felt a sense of fear spread through their bodies. Logically speaking, there were close to 100,000 Lansang soldiers here. Even 100,000 pigs couldn't be killed in such a short amount of time. Furthermore, these were young and strong soldiers with their own thoughts. The moment this thought flashed through their minds, reality told them the answer. Behind them, dense gunshots rang out from the left and right. The 5,000 reinforcements who became the target became the center of the battlefield at this moment, becoming the point where the bullets poured out. The original Lansang soldiers already had experience after many people died. That was, if they could sit, they definitely wouldn't stand. If they could lie down, they definitely wouldn't sit. Therefore, when 5,000 targets suddenly appeared on the battlefield, it was obvious what would happen. There was no need to aim too much. After all, the 5,000 people standing there were too obvious a target. The gunshots were already continuous. Extinguish the torches and lie down on the ground. The chilly Arch, who was lying on the ground like an ostrich, saw that at least a few hundred of his brothers had died in a very short amount of time. At the same time, he couldn't help but cry out loudly. Fortunately, his reaction was very fast. After getting up and shouting, he immediately lay down on the ground again. A bullet whistled past his head. He was so scared that his heartbeat quickened. He really didn't dare to imagine what would have happened if he had been a step slower. In the end, this shout was still effective. Some soldiers still heard it and threw away their torches and lay down on the ground. Although the bullets whistled past their heads from time to time, it was no longer a threat to their lives. The 5,000 reinforcements quietened down after a few hundred people died. The battlefield fell silent once more. At this moment, no one wanted to challenge or test anything. They all lay down on the ground obediently, allowing the rain to soak their bodies. Fortunately, it was only August, and the night wasn't too cold. Otherwise, it would be really hard to imagine what would happen if they lay down like this for the entire night. Battalion commander, they have all become obedient. A soldier who was very close to Chin Bo looked at the scene in front of him and said with a face full of excitement, "Previously, when the soldiers of the 2nd Battalion knew that they had to deal with the 100,000 Lansang soldiers alone, it was impossible for them not to be nervous. Although it was true that they had the most advanced firearms in the world, the difference in numbers was still too great. Even with the assistance of 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries, most of the soldiers still didn't have the confidence to kill the enemy." Chapter 5:21. Until now, seeing that the Lansang soldiers were scared out of their wits, their morale was completely gone. They were like obedient sheep lying on the ground without moving. Only then did they relax. The joy of victory also boosted the morale of the soldiers and increased their confidence. That's right, they've all become obedient. Chun Bo said with a satisfied expression, although his plan was thorough and he was confident that he would obtain the final victory. Before there was a result, any accidents could happen. Thinking about the military order he made in front of the 6th young master, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't worried at all. Fortunately, the heavens were on his side. This light rain came at the right time. Finally, the situation was settled. He could also give a satisfactory answer to the 6th young master. He was happy in his heart, and a smile appeared on his face. How about this? Notify everyone to take turns to rest. Let everyone recover their energy. There will be a bigger test waiting for us at dawn. Right now, they were just surrounding these people. As for whether they could take them all down, there were still many things to be done. Of course, the next battle wasn't a big battle. As long as everything went according to plan, it was obvious what choice these 100,000 people would make. When people were sleeping, time would often pass very quickly. However, it was also nighttime. Lying in the water and lying in the mud, that feeling was completely different. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that a day felt like a year. No matter if they were lying down or lying down, the feeling of being soaked in the rain wouldn't be too good. Not to mention, the light rain didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Not only that, there was a moderate rain in the middle of the night. That feeling was really uncomfortable. Even so, no one couldn't endure it, because everyone knew that if they dared to stand up at this time, they would definitely become the target of the muskets. The worst thing was that even if they stood up, they didn't know where to run to. Originally, they had retreated by running all the way back. Their bodies were very tired. In addition, they didn't eat much. Under the hunger and sleepiness, their spirits were not good. In such an environment, they could not sleep even if they wanted to. Thus, when the sun began to rise, the morale of the 100,000 Landsong army had already dropped to the lowest point. The summer days were long to begin with, so the sun rose earlier in the morning. The mercenaries who surrounded them only slept for a little more than 2 hours before they had to wake up. Fortunately, they were able to sleep well for the past 2 days. In addition, they were prepared. Every soldier was wearing a raincoat. In terms of mental state, they were much better than the Landsong soldiers. From the moment the sky started to brighten, the mercenaries held their guns tightly in their hands, ready for the Landsong soldiers to counterattack. However, it was obvious that this was unnecessary. Tired, sleepy, and hungry, the soldiers of the Landsong kingdom had long lost the courage to resist. They did not know where to escape to, nor did they know where to go. In such a situation, even though lying on the ground was very uncomfortable, they could only do so. It's about time. Seeing that the expected riot did not happen, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo heaved a sigh of relief. He stood up and his eyes shone. Pass down the order. The cooking squad can start working now. About an hour later, bursts of fragrance began to spread in all directions. When this fragrance entered the noses of the surrounded Landsong soldiers, it caused many of their bodies to move. When a person was very hungry, even the food that they usually disdained to eat would be very delicious. Furthermore, under the orders of Battalion Commander Chunbo, the cooking squad put a lot of fresh meat in their breakfast. When the smell of the meat soup floated in the air, it only increased their appetite. Under the temptation of the meat soup, many Landsong soldiers forced themselves to look into the distance. What they saw were groups of soldiers in camouflage uniforms and some soldiers in Jiaoji army uniforms queuing up to get food. These soldiers had a big bowl in their left hand and a big bun in their right hand. They were drinking the soup and eating the bun, looking extremely happy. Rumble. At this moment, someone's stomach rumbled. When this rumbling sound rang out, no one laughed at him. On the contrary, when everyone looked into the distance, they could not help but swallow their saliva. It was clear that this scene was not small to them. After another hour, the mercenaries took turns to eat a hot breakfast. To them, in the 3 days that they were hiding here, they had been eating instant noodles, ham sausages, and all kinds of canned food. Although it was not a problem to fill their stomachs, it was not as good as eating hot food. The mercenaries all ate a hot breakfast and were all full. Then they returned to their respective teams and continued their surveillance work. The only difference was that the pots that were cooking the soup didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Under the dozens of temporary tents, the soup was still steaming and the aroma was everywhere. When a new pot of broth had been boiled and a new pot of steamed buns had been piled up, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo took out a simple loudspeaker and began to broadcast his voice. Soldiers of Landsong Kingdom, I believe that many of you can understand what I am saying. Of course, if you don't understand, it's fine. You can ask the people around you who understand Chinese. Standing on top of a tall post with one hand on his waist and the other holding a megaphone, Chun Bo shouted loudly. Landsong Kingdom was the Lao's protector of the great Ming dynasty. Naturally, there was no lack of people who understood Chinese. Because of the influence, there were very few people who did not understand Chinese. Noticing that everyone was looking at him, Chunbo first laughed and then continued to shout, "Soldiers of Lansang Kingdom, there are only two paths in front of you. The first is to stubbornly resist and die. The second is to immediately surrender and live. I won't say anything to those who want to die. You can try to charge out and see if your speed is faster or if our guns are faster. As for the brothers who want to live, you can walk out of the ranks now, lay down your weapons, and surrender. You can drink hot meat soup and eat hot buns. Your lives will be preserved, and the only thing you will lose is your temporary freedom. Otherwise, don't think about playing tricks with us. If anyone wants to fake surrender, I can guarantee that he will suffer a fate worse than death. All right, whether you live or die is in front of you. Make your own choice." Passing the megaphone in his hand to the signaler, Chunbo waved his hand, and 2,000 Jiaoji mercenaries walked out. Each of them held a long blade in their hands. 200 people in a group stood beside a large pot, ready to accept any surrender at any time. 10,000 people wanting to subdue 100,000 enemy soldiers. It was like a fantasy story. After a night of rain, coupled with the fact that he was tired and hungry, Chunbo did it just like that. Without any fighting spirit, the 100,000 Lansang soldiers, without a leader, were like docile little sheep. Seeing a tiger open its bloody mouth, they could only surrender. One by one, the Lansang soldiers climbed up from the ground in a sorry state. Their bodies were covered in mud as they walked over weakly. Of course, even if it was 100,000 broken soldiers, it was still 100,000 lives. If they were not careful, it could lead to irreversible consequences. In order to ensure that these surrendered soldiers were obedient, the surrounding Lung Feng and auxiliary soldiers no longer hid. Instead, they took the initiative to walk out. From time to time, they would even fire a shot into the sky to intimidate the surrendered soldiers who had other ideas. It was clear that Chunbo was overthinking things. Under the starvation, the Lansang soldiers who had lost their fighting spirit only thought of one thing, and that was to survive. How could they dare to have other thoughts? Furthermore, if they wanted to surrender, they had to throw away the weapons in their hands. If they did not even have weapons to defend themselves, how could they resist? Just like that, the surrender ceremony of less than 100,000 soldiers went unexpectedly smoothly. What made Chunbo very satisfied was that there was also news from Yinglu City. Su Yunsheng and the Spring Sun Company commander did not disappoint him and successfully took down the city. The surrender ceremony was also going smoothly in the morning. Shiyu City, all kinds of information were gathered in the hands of the 6th young master, Yang Chendong. After knowing that Commander Nyatong's plan to lure the enemy was successful and that Lei Xiai's troops had returned to Yinglu City, Yang Chendong knew that the Lansang Kingdom's reinforcements would not be a hindrance to his advance. Even if Chunbo could not imprison the 100,000 soldiers, he could at least defeat them. Young Master, Commander Chen must have made his move last night. Tiger's man analyzed the information and came to the same conclusion. That's right. Yang Chendong agreed. Then he looked in the direction of Shiyu City and said, since Commander Chen has already made his move, then we should also have some progress on our side. Pass down the order, prepare to attack the city. The matter in Jiaoji needs to be resolved as soon as possible. At this point, Yang Chendong could not help but think of the information sent by the Security Bureau 2 days ago. The Southern Ming imperial bodyguards actually went to Jianing and took away his 4th brother. Although from the information, the other party's attitude was still considered polite when doing this. However, Yang Chendong knew that Zhu Qizhen did not have the courage to lower his face. Therefore, he only took away his 4th brother and did not immediately do anything. To put it bluntly, Zhu Qizhen was targeting him. He wanted to use this as a warning. However, Yang Qindong was not too worried. Although he was a little worried about his fourth brother's safety, he believed that as long as nothing happened to him, Zhu Qizhen would not be so stupid as to go against his fourth brother. After all, killing Yang Qindong would not benefit Ingzong at all. It would only force Yang Qindong to rebel. Chapter 5:22. Since he could see this, Zhu Qizhen should be able to see it as well. Even fourth brother was taken away, so it could be seen that Zhu Qizhen was afraid of him. In order to suppress his development, Ingzong would definitely think of ways to stop him from expanding. It wouldn't be long before the imperial edict arrived. In other words, he didn't have much time left. Tiger's Mane, tell Yang San to think of a way to stop the imperial eunuch. I don't want to see them so soon. Understood. Tiger's Mane replied and left. When he gave the order to prepare for the siege, he also called the deputy chief of the security bureau, Yang San, over. On the west side of the city, there were many armored soldiers, and the atmosphere was tense. The Lansong Kingdom's 100,000 reinforcements suddenly retreated, which gave King Li Li a bad feeling. Even though he had yet to figure out what had happened, he knew that Jiaoji was in grave danger this time. In fact, until now, or rather until now, the Jiaoji Kingdom's communication with the outside world had been cut off. All they could see was what was happening in front of them, although there was no information from the outside world. As the king of Li, who had once wrestled with the great Ming dynasty, his formidable potential was displayed. He summoned all the civil and military officials and said with certainty, the mercenaries should be attacking soon. We should also be prepared. There weren't many people who dared to oppose Li Li's words. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was one of them. Seeing that his father didn't have any information and didn't have any reliable information, he said with a doubtful tone, "Father, why do you say that?" His son was good at everything, but he was a little too confident. With this kind of personality, he wouldn't easily trust others, even if he was his father. In truth, Li Yuanlong still valued his father very much. It was just that he had made some bad decisions in the past, especially when his base of operations in the Nine-Truth County had been occupied. This had caused his personality to change a little. He always wanted to prove himself, which led to this problem. If others asked, perhaps Li Li wouldn't give any explanation. After all, he was the king, and he didn't need to consider other people's opinions when making decisions. But the one who asked this question was his son, so everything was a different story. He tried his best to speak in an amiable tone. Father made this decision based on two judgments. First, the Lansong Kingdom's 100,000 reinforcements suddenly retreated. Although we still don't know the reason, their retreat must be caused by the mercenaries. This proves that they are preparing to make a move. 2. Extending the second finger of his right hand, King Li Li continued, "The diplomatic group we sent to contact the southern Ming has already left for a long time. Even the news of the capital being occupied has been sent out for a period of time. Presumably, the current emperor of the southern Ming dynasty should also know about what happened here. Since the mercenaries have such a strong fighting strength, I'm sure that not only us, but also the young emperor of the southern Ming dynasty. Unless there was something wrong with his brain, he would definitely think of a way to stop the mercenaries from growing stronger. If the mercenaries don't make a move now, I'm afraid that they won't have a chance to do anything once the emperor's imperial edict is issued." It had to be said that Li Li's intelligence was indeed very high, and his analysis was also very thorough. This was indeed one of the reasons why Yang Qindong was in a hurry to make a move. Of course, Li Li didn't know that the second reason why Yang Qindong was in a hurry to make a move was because he didn't want to waste too much time on conquering the Jiaoji kingdom. The destruction of a kingdom was a huge matter for the generals and even the monarchs in ancient times. It might even take a long time to prepare for this battle. Even if it took 10, 20, or even longer, it would take several generations of people to work together. However, all of this didn't mean much to Yang Qindong, who had mastered the advanced firearms. Although his strength wasn't too strong right now, it was still possible to win against the great Ming dynasty, but it was impossible to easily conquer the Jiaoji kingdom. After all, the great Ming dynasty's territory was too big, to the point that the people in his hands wouldn't even make a splash. In comparison, Jiaoji was different. It was only a small kingdom, and he was already prepared to conquer it. It must be known that Yang Qindong's ambition was so big that it was impossible for others to understand. Even so, if he had to spend so much time and effort on a small kingdom like Jiaoji, it would be impossible for him to achieve his goal in this lifetime. If he had to spend so much effort on such a small kingdom, what would he do when he faced the big kingdoms? As such, Yang Qindong didn't want to wait any longer. He wanted to make a swift and decisive decision and quickly resolve the matter of Jiaoji. In this way, even if others were dissatisfied with what he had done, what else could they say when he had done all that he had to do? No matter what Yang Qindong was thinking, at least Li Li's analysis was correct. After he explained the two reasons, even Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was convinced. He then said, "Father, since this is the case, should we prepare to fight?" Of course we should fight, but we also need to make preparations for peace talks. Li Li nodded first, then shook his head and said with a sorrowful tone, "Our Jiaoji is still too weak. We can't continue fighting this war. Otherwise, even if the mercenaries don't destroy us, the others won't let us go." After saying this, Li Li said with a somewhat angry voice, "Send someone to investigate the assassination of the Duchess of Zhongdang." What is going on? That assassin is called Mo Ta, right? What is his background? Hearing his father mention this matter, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong immediately reported what he knew. "Father, I have sent someone to investigate Mo Ta's matter. Although he is from Jiaoji, he is no longer under our control. We have been wrongly accused. Of course, this prince knows this, but we still need to give him an explanation. How about this? Let's investigate this matter thoroughly." Li Li said with a dark expression. Mo Ta tried to assassinate Yang Qindong's wife, but was killed before he could succeed. This didn't seem like a big deal. However, it had now become the fuse that ignited the war. If this matter wasn't resolved, the mercenaries wouldn't retreat so easily. Even if it was to give the other party a way out, this matter had to be investigated thoroughly. "Yes, I understand." Li Yuanlong nodded after understanding his father's intentions. "All right, boys, it's time for you to perform. If the mercenaries attack, this king hopes that everyone can give it their all. Only with a perfect performance on the battlefield can the negotiations proceed smoothly. Only then can our Jiaoji kingdom regain its strength and return to its golden age." Yes, all the civil and military officials lowered their heads in agreement. They knew what would happen to them if they lost the next battle. Becoming a prisoner was probably the best outcome for him. Thinking that they would lose their freedom and all the pleasures of life, it was no wonder that everyone would do their best. Just as the Jiaoji army was preparing, the mercenaries 10 li outside the city started moving forward. 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries lined up on both sides. The 3 battalions of the Cold Vanguard were at the front as the main force. Beside them were 7 auxiliary battalions, and behind them were 7 temporary auxiliary battalions. The army of 25,000 slowly moved forward in an orderly manner, from the original distance of 10 miles to 9 miles, 8 miles, all the way until they were 4 miles away before they finally came to a stop. Facing the mercenaries who were eyeing them covetously, the Jiaoji army in Shiyu City quickly reacted. General Li Xiaozhong was the vanguard. He led 30,000 soldiers out of the East City Gate and began to get into formation. If the mercenaries dared to move forward, they would charge forward and fight to the death. Li Xiaozhong wasn't a general in the Jiaoji army and wasn't a famous general. However, King Lili still sent him out as the vanguard. It was obvious that he was testing the waters. At the same time, he seemed to be telling Yang Qindong that he didn't intend to fight to the death. If there was anything, they could sit down and discuss it. How could Yang Qindong not see the goodwill shown by the Jiaoji army? Not only did he see it, but the people around him also felt the same way. For example, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Luo Pa, smiled and said, "Sixth young master, it seems like they're a bit scared." Ha ha ha. Hearing the commander's words, the other officers also laughed loudly. Yang Qindong also had a smile on his face. However, the smile quickly disappeared and was replaced with determination. Send 2 auxiliary battalions. Let's take care of them first. Fear wasn't the result Yang Qindong wanted. Looking at the history of China, weren't many foreign races like this? When you are weak, they will bully you without any hesitation. When you are strong, they will try to please you with a fearful look. This is the nature of human nature. The difference was that Yang Qindong wasn't as magnanimous. Of course, he wasn't magnanimous. Speaking of which, he was very vengeful. Since they wanted to participate in the Great Ming's internal strife, they had to be prepared to go for wool and come home shorn. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. If you wanted to punch someone, you wouldn't let them hit you. Chapter 5:23. Initially, everyone was worried that the 6th young master would take pity on them for showing weakness. After all, as soldiers, the battlefield was the best place to test themselves. If there were no more battles to fight, their presence would only get weaker and weaker. Now, Yang Qindong did not relent because of their actions. He still decided to fight first. The 7 battalion commanders of the auxiliary battalions were all agitated. However, it was a pity that there were only 2 slots. In an instant, the 7 battalions were fighting over them. Lu Zhuo was also having a headache over the fact that there were clearly not enough slots to go around. Speaking of which, the 7 battalions were not too far apart in terms of fighting strength. It was not easy to choose who to send. After asking for instructions from Yang Qindong, they decided to draw lots to decide who to send. Of course, Lu Zhuo also said that if they were lucky enough to be sent but did not perform well on the battlefield, they would be sent to the sidelines the next time something like this happened. At most, they would be sent to the 2nd echelon. The lucky ones were the 5th and 6th battalions. However, the other battalions were not without hope. As long as they did not perform well, it would be time for them to fight. In order not to give the other battalions a chance, the 5th and 6th battalion commanders gathered their company commanders, platoon commanders, and even squad leaders to hold an emergency meeting. In their words, if anyone messed up in the upcoming battle, they could not blame them for being ruthless and directly expelling them from the military. This was expelling them from the military, not just retirement. The latter would at least not be in the military anymore. They could still do other things. Moreover, with a military background, many units in Qiqian City would fight for them. However, if they were really expelled from the military, they would be too ashamed to face anyone. That would be even more painful than death. Yes, the 2 battalions had a total of 800 soldiers. Every one of them was yelling and shouting, looking as though they were going to give it their all. In terms of logistics, the soldiers of the 2 battalions had a decent lunch of 6 meat and 2 vegetables. After resting for 15 minutes, The 800 soldiers leaped over the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Front Battalion and slowly approached the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers outside the city. No matter where the Cold Front Battalion went, they were the absolute main force. However, they had no intention of fighting the first battle, which made the company commanders below look displeased. First Company Commander Tian Su went straight to Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin to express his dissatisfaction. Battalion Commander, why didn't you let us fight in the first battle? Does the 6th young master have something against us? Bullshit! Kong Chuanshin frowned after hearing this and shouted, Bullshit! In comparison, Kong Chuanshin's temper was relatively good among the 3 battalion commanders of Cold Front's 2nd Regiment. Although he didn't have the aura of a scholarly general like that of 2nd Battalion Commander Qinbo, he was at least much better than 1st Battalion Commander Wu Shang, who was a martial artist. However, at this moment, he couldn't help but curse. He couldn't be blamed for his temper. He was already upset that he hadn't used him in the first battle. He originally thought that the 1st Battalion was still in Langsun, waiting for the Jiaoji army to retreat, while the 2nd Battalion was outside Yinglu City, dealing with the 100,000 Lansong army. Naturally, the heavy responsibility of attacking Nanyu City would fall to him. He had even made preparations to mobilize his troops before the battle. However, who would have thought that the 6th young master wouldn't use them in the first battle and instead sent out 2 auxiliary battalions? This disappointed him and made him angry. Now that the company commanders below were looking for him, it would be strange if he was in a good mood. Although he was angry, Kong Chuanshin knew that he couldn't bring his temper into the army. Therefore, after cursing, he said, Don't think too much. The 6th young master definitely wants to use the steel on the blade. Don't you know that the enemy's general is just a nobody in the Jiaoji army? Against them, there's no need for a main force like us to fight. Therefore, we should be prepared to fight against their main force. That's what the Cold Front should be doing. Kong Chuanshin's thoughts were exactly what Yang Chendong was thinking. However, they were facing 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers, and they weren't even the strongest. They didn't see any iron shield soldiers or iron chariots. The enemy wasn't even the elephant soldiers or black soldiers. Why would he send out his strongest main force? Sending out 2 auxiliary battalions was already giving them a lot of face. Although it seemed like there was a huge gap between 800 and 20,000, Yang Chendong wasn't worried at all. The mercenaries had the most advanced firearms in the world. As long as they didn't rush over to fight the enemy in close combat, they had a high chance of winning even if they had 800 against 20,000. Just like in the later stages of the Ming dynasty, the small slave builders only had a few hundred cavalrymen, and they were able to kill tens of thousands of Ming dynasty soldiers. If even they could do it, the mercenaries wouldn't have a problem. Back to the main topic. The 800 soldiers from the 2 auxiliary battalions walked out from the mercenaries and approached the Jiaoji army. Young Master Li was riding on his horse. When he saw that less than 1,000 mercenaries had walked out, he couldn't help but laugh coldly. These mercenaries are too arrogant. Do they really think that they are made of iron and can't be killed? Humph! Trying to shake my 30,000 strong army with less than 1,000 men? You are asking for death. I'll grant you your wish. Men, blow the battle horn. Charge and kill them. Although Li Xiaozhong knew that the mercenaries were equipped with advanced firearms, he quickly suppressed his fear when he considered the fact that he had an advantage in numbers. As the order was given, the 30,000 Jiaoji army advanced step by step under the sharp sound of the battle horn. There were more than 10,000 soldiers, and there was no end to them. Outside the east gate of Shiyu City, when the 30,000 soldiers were spread out, the pressure they exuded was immense. At the very least, these Jiaoji soldiers were emboldened by this aura. With every step they took, they shouted the word kill. Their voices reverberated between heaven and earth, lingering for a long time without dissipating. On the East Gate Tower of Shiyu City, King Li and the Crown Prince were watching. When they saw that the mercenaries had sent out less than 1,000 men, they couldn't help but look down on them. Most of them were thinking that even if the mercenaries had advanced weapons, they were still too arrogant to use only 800 to fight 30,000. As long as these people charged in front of them, they would be able to kill the mercenaries with just a spit of saliva. Indeed, many Jiaoji people had such thoughts. On the other hand, the mercenaries also had the same thought. It was time for the auxiliary soldiers to show off their might. When the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers began to move forward, the 800 auxiliary soldiers stopped moving. Then, one by one, the soldiers checked their weapons and ammunition. In just 10 seconds, all the soldiers picked up their guns and looked forward. In fact, they had already checked their weapons countless times before they arrived. Their actions just now were subconscious. 5th Battalion, target 6 to 12 o'clock. Get ready. 6th Battalion, target 12 to 6 o'clock. Get ready. The 2 auxiliary battalion commanders gave the command to prepare for battle at the same time. 800 soldiers stood in the same line, giving the impression of a long green dragon entrenched on the ground. Open fire. The distance between the two sides was now only 400 meters, completely within the firing range of the muskets. The 2 battalion commanders immediately gave the order to open fire, and a series of gunshots instantly suppressed the other party's footsteps and sounds. Bullets flew out horizontally. When the 8-Nation Alliance entered Beijing, there were only 1,000 of them. However, they were able to defeat tens of thousands of Qing soldiers and the Boxer groups. This was the power of firearms. At that time, the 8-Nation Alliance mostly used rifles, the kind that needed to be reloaded after every shot. Moreover, the effective range of those rifles was only 200 to 300 meters. In comparison, it was much worse than the Type 81 rifles used by the auxiliary soldiers. Even though the Type 81 rifles were made by the Qiqian City Munitions factory, they were not as good as the Type 81 rifles in Yang Qindong's warehouse. However, there were all kinds of detailed introduction books and the best finished products as templates. The Type 81 rifles produced by the munitions factory were quite good, reaching 70% of the original gun's effect. At the very least, although the Type 81 rifle's effective killing range did not reach the original 800 meters, it could reach the current 500 meters. Currently, at a distance of 400 meters, every bullet could take a person's life. Of course, when facing a black mass of enemies, there was no need to aim. Any bullet that was fired, as long as it did not hit the sky or the ground, could hit someone. Gunshots rang out. When 800 Type 81 rifles were fired at the same time, the scene was very shocking. As their bullets poured out from the barrels of their guns, their enemies, the Jiaoji soldiers who came from afar, fell to the ground in droves. Previously, they relied on their numbers and were full of morale. Even when they took a step forward and shouted the word kill, it was indeed effective in raising their morale. However, at the end of the day, it was just to encourage themselves. When faced with life and death, no one knew if this courage would be useful. Every time a bullet was fired, a Jiaoji soldier would fall to the ground. When such things happened one after another without any signs of stopping, even if they still had the courage to shout the word kill, in reality, they were already afraid. There was no one who was not afraid of death, especially when they knew that they were going to die. They did not even have the mentality to try their luck. One could imagine what kind of blow the morale of the army was taking. Under the shock of the advanced rifles, the morale of the Jiaoji soldiers began to drop. As the figures fell, the Jiaoji soldiers had only advanced 50 meters before they began to stagnate. Some of the more cowardly ones even began to tremble, wondering if they should retreat and run. Chapter 5:24. Death was scary to some people, but to do it despite knowing that death was inevitable would only make it even scarier. Idiot, charge! On top of the city gate tower, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong watched his soldiers die one by one under the mercenaries' guns. In fact, there were hundreds of people paying the price with their lives every breath. It would be a lie to say that he did not feel heartache. However, since they had already charged, there was no turning back. Since that was the case, they should be thinking about how to achieve victory. Without a doubt, how were they going to charge past the hundreds of enemies? The most important thing was to engage in close combat and reduce the effectiveness of the enemy's firearms. Perhaps to prove the Crown Prince's words, the commanding general below the city wall, Li Xiaozhong, happened to give the order for the entire army to charge. He continued to shout the battle cry, and at the same time, he shouted to the people around him in a bewitching manner. They only have 800 people. As long as we can rush to their side, victory will belong to us. Charge! Whoever kills one enemy will be promoted by 3 ranks and will be rewarded with 100 taels of silver. With such a great reward, brave men were bound to come forward. Especially when Li Xiaozhong killed a few soldiers who wanted to retreat, the other Jiaoji soldiers gritted their teeth and charged forward. That's right, once they charged forward, the firearms in the hands of the mercenaries would not be as effective. That would be the time for them to kill the enemy, retreat. Seeing that the enemy had finally come to their senses and knew how to charge, the 2 commanding generals of the Jiaoji battalion immediately ordered. At the same time, the soldiers of the 5th and 6th battalions gave the order to retreat. At the same time, the guns in their hands continued to spit out flames and bullets. Jiaoji soldiers kept falling in the path of the charge. However, because one side was charging with full force while the other side was retreating, the distance between the 2 sides was slowly closing as more and more people died. First platoon, activate continuous fire mode. Fire all your bullets quickly. Second platoon, third platoon, prepare to fire. Seeing that the distance between the 2 sides had been reduced from 400 meters to less than 100 meters, and soon it was only 60 to 70 meters, and the distance was still rapidly shrinking, the 5th and 6th battalion commanders issued a new order. It would be a lie to say that they were not afraid when facing the charge of tens of thousands of people with only 800 people. After all, the momentum of so many people rushing over was very frightening. Fortunately, their usual training was effective. Yang Chendong had long anticipated that they would often be outnumbered, so when he trained them, he placed special emphasis on courage. The lone hero had become the role model and goal in the hearts of all the warriors. In addition, the 2 battalion commanders had already said that if anyone dropped the ball, they would face the consequences of being expelled from the army. After all, the 6th young master was watching from behind. As a member of the auxiliary troops, it was rare for him to be in the limelight like this. If he retreated out of fear, or even ran away, he would lose all his face. It was under such encouragement that none of the soldiers retreated even though they were still a little afraid. Instead, they listened to the orders of the 2 battalion commanders. They opened fire and dropped bombs. Everything seemed to be in order. Seeing that the mercenaries were getting closer and closer, the eyes of the Jiaoji soldiers at the front glowed with excitement. In their eyes, victory was right in front of them. As long as they advanced a few dozen meters, as long as they could get close to the mercenaries, the effects of their firearms would be limited. That would be the time for them to show off their might. Dreams were beautiful, but reality was cruel. Just as these Jiaoji soldiers were trying their best to run forward and seemed to have seen the light at the end of the tunnel, hundreds of objects suddenly flew over their heads. Those objects seemed to have grown eyes as they landed in the midst of the charging Jiaoji soldiers. In the next moment, a series of deafening explosions were heard. Correspondingly, Jiaoji soldiers were blown away by the explosions. Grenades could be considered as small cannons for close combat. Once they landed in a crowd, the impact was so great that everything within a 3-meter radius would be flattened. The pitiful Jiaoji soldiers at the front were instantly devoured by the power of the gunpowder. Ta-ta-ta, the Type 81 rifles of the 2 auxiliary platoons were in continuous firing mode. In that instant, bullets rained down on the Jiaoji soldiers. Some of the Jiaoji soldiers who were lucky enough not to be hit by the grenades became live targets. One by one, they were hit by the bullets and fell to the ground. Grenades! Throw them! With each squad as a unit, the sounds of explosions were incessant. While corpses were sent flying, deep craters of varying sizes were blasted into the ground. Run! No one knew which Jiaoji soldier was the first to shout, but the Jiaoji army that was charging forward with an aggressive momentum finally began to retreat, especially when some of the soldiers realized that the explosive objects that were thrown on the ground had a limited range. They began to run even faster. The initial wave of ferocious attacks was thus suppressed. Chase and fire at the same time. Seeing an opportunity, the 5th and 6th Battalion commanders put away their grenades and raised their guns to give chase. The Jiaoji soldiers behind them, who were too slow to escape, fell to the ground one by one. In the middle of the mercenary army, Yang Qindong observed all of this with his binoculars. A look of relief appeared on his face. Just a moment ago, he had already planned to send the other auxiliary battalions and even the main battalion of the Cold Front. After all, if the Jiaoji soldiers had really reached them, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Such a loss was not something he wanted to see. Fortunately, the 2 auxiliary battalions did not disappoint him. They withstood the initial pressure and won the final victory. Of course, facing such an attack, Yang Qindong actually had a better idea. For example, he could casually take out a few powerful cannons from the warehouse. When the cannons were fired, the enemy's attack would be instantly neutralized. However, he did not do so in the end. He was not worried about how to explain the sudden appearance of the cannons. After all, the Cold Front soldiers had already treated him as a god. He did not need to explain anything to anyone. What he was worried about was that if he used the cannons this time, what about the next time? When he was not on the battlefield, what would happen if the mercenaries wanted to attack the city or even destroy the country? It was impossible to have the help of the cannons every time. Without chariots, not to mention the difficulty of transporting such a thing, if such a treasure fell into the hands of the enemy, the consequences would be fatal. Of course, it was necessary to use the cannons appropriately. After all, the Cold Front would need to be equipped with a certain number of cannons in the future. However, even if they were to be used, they would have to be used on the blade. On the battlefield, as the mercenaries retreated, the 2 auxiliary battalions began to counterattack, although their footsteps were not very fast, because the enemy was still within shooting range of the 81 caliber guns. Every time they fired, there would still be enemies who would fall to the ground. Open the city gates and let them in. On the tower of Shiyu City, seeing the defeated Jiaoji soldiers being slaughtered right under his nose, the King of Lily's face was already pale. He suddenly realized that he seemed to be really old. He actually began to feel fear from the bottom of his heart. This was something that had never happened to him when he was young. Even when he was facing the powerful Ming dynasty, he still dared to make his own voice and arm wrestle. But now, in the face of the seemingly invincible mercenaries who were able to repel his 30,000-strong army, with less than 1,000 people, he really didn't know what to do or what to do at this moment. On the tower, the Jiaoji archers began to continuously fire arrows. Although they were far from being able to hit the mercenaries who were still 400 meters away, they at least had to show that they had the ability to counterattack. The East City Gate was already wide open, allowing General Li Xiaozhong and his defeated soldiers to successfully enter the city. Although they were defeated, they were still Jiaoji soldiers after all. Needless to say, who would not be defeated when facing such an opponent? After the soldiers surged into the city gate, they did not even have time to care about the wounded soldier who was shot but did not die. The city gate was quickly closed. They were afraid that the mercenaries would take the opportunity to directly attack the city. However, in reality, the two auxiliary battalions had already retreated. In this battle, they had killed at least a few thousand people and successfully completed their mission. When the 5th and 6th Battalion commanders returned to the barracks, they were naturally praised by Yang Qindong. He also announced that their contributions would be recorded and would be rewarded when the time was right. The 2 battalion commanders immediately received countless envious gazes. Although the other battalion commanders were also jealous, they knew that these 2 battalion commanders had some ability after witnessing everything. Just the fact that they were able to remain unmoved in the face of 10 times the enemy's pressure was already admirable. As for contributions, with so many enemies, was there a need to be afraid that there would not be any more battles to fight in the future? As long as one was strong enough, gold would always shine. After the battle, it was almost night time. Yang Qindong had no intention of launching a night attack. It was not that he did not have the ability to do so, but the current Jiaoji was not worth it for him to do so. Therefore, other than the soldiers who were left behind to carry out the necessary patrols, the rest of the soldiers went to bed early after dinner. Others could rest, but Yang Qindong could not. He still had too many things to do. For example, the 2nd Battalion commander, Chun Bo, had sent news that they had successfully completed their mission. They had killed General La Ti of the Lansang Kingdom's reinforcements and more than 5,000 soldiers. The remaining 95,000 Lansang soldiers and 1,000 Jiaoji soldiers in Yinglu City had all become captives. After the first step was completed, Chun Bo asked for instructions on what to do next. In response, Yang Qindong gave the orders while Tiger's Mane recorded them down. Inform Hanoi City to send out 20,000 educated youths from Qiqian City. Leave 2,000 of them in Yinglu City to carry out preaching activities. The rest will help Battalion Commander Chen to take the captives back. Inform the Navy to be prepared to send the captives to Qiqian City. Chapter 5:25. After dealing with the matter of Yinglu City in a decisive manner, he picked up another piece of information to read. When he saw the information, Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh coldly. The information came from the Southern Ming Empire's imperial palace. The person who sent the information was one of the chief eunuchs, Mao Mu, as the most important spy by Yingzong's side. Unless it was a major event, he wouldn't send out any information. Since the information came from him, it must be very important. Just like what was recorded in the information, Yingzong actually listened to the opinions of his ministers and wanted to borrow money from Yang Qindong. The emperor of a country actually wanted to borrow money from his ministers. Wasn't this a very comical matter? However, it happened now, and Yang Qindong became the main character of this matter. Obviously, one of the ministers didn't like him and wanted to smear some medicine on him. In addition, the Southern Ming Empire had just separated, and their foundation wasn't very solid. Then, there was civil strife in the south. When they quelled the rebellion, they spent a lot of money. Now that they didn't have to pay taxes from Guangdong, Guangxi, and Yunnan, their lives were even more difficult. At this time, they had to recruit 1 million more soldiers. The amount of money they needed to spend was uncountable. The treasury was running out of money. Someone suggested that they could borrow money from Yang Qindong. After all, this person had set up a bank in Ming. It was said that his savings had reached more than 40 million taels. It shouldn't be a problem to borrow 20 to 30 million taels. Zhu Qizhen, who was lacking money, felt that this seemed to be a feasible path after hearing the suggestions of his ministers. He decided to let the eunuch in charge of announcing the edict tell Yang Qindong to stop sending troops to Jiaoji. Then, he would ask him to lend money to the southern Ming Empire to tide over the current crisis. Mao Mu said this in the information. After being sent by the Security Bureau, the information was first placed in front of Yang Qindong. Seeing that this was simply wishful thinking, Hu Mang wanted to throw the report away the moment he saw it. However, considering that this matter was not known to the young master, once the imperial eunuch from the southern Ming Empire arrived, wouldn't he be unprepared? Thus, in the end, this piece of information still appeared in front of Yang Qindong. Now that he saw Yang Qindong laughing while holding the information, Tiger's Mane suggested, "Young master, I think Zhu Qizhen's head must have been kicked by a donkey. This is just wishful thinking. We don't have to pay attention to it." Yang Qindong, when the mercenary officers heard that his head had been kicked by a description donkey, was very appropriate. He used it to describe those ignorant people hearing Tiger's Mane's suggestion. Yang Qindong tilted his head and looked at him. "Do you also think that Zhu Qizhen's head is rusty?" Seeing that Yang Qindong didn't seem to think so, Tiger's Mane said with a puzzled expression, "Young master, isn't that the case? Even an idiot can see that he wants to strengthen the southern Ming Empire. With our development, it is only a matter of time before we become enemies. If we help them now, isn't it the same as creating a powerful enemy for ourselves?" It was no wonder that Tiger's Mane said this. Originally, when Yang Qindong was building an army in Qiqian City, they didn't understand the young master's intentions. After all, the great Ming Empire was too powerful in their eyes. They were so powerful that they couldn't be shaken. They didn't even dare to think about it. However, after wiping out the Huang bandit army and conquering several cities in Jiaoji, they changed their minds. With such a powerful army and heaven-defying firearms, why couldn't they set their sights on something bigger? Didn't the ancients say that it was better to be a king than a general? Since that was the case, why couldn't they dream about becoming an emperor? Moreover, the great Ming dynasty was originally snatched from the Yuan dynasty, so it seemed reasonable for someone else to snatch it away from them. It had to be said that Tiger's Mane wasn't the only one who had such thoughts. Many of the high-ranking officers in the mercenary army also had such thoughts. It could be said that this had already formed a certain scale. This way, if Yang Qindong wanted to attack the great Ming Empire one day, there wouldn't be any resistance. However, in Yang Qindong's eyes, this wasn't the case. At the very least, he knew that the so-called one day was still far away from him. As for the reason, of course, it was because of the population. Before solving this problem, Yang Qindong really didn't want to fall out with the great Ming Empire. Otherwise, who knew how much effort and time it would take to solve these problems towards the great Ming Empire, Yang Qindong naturally couldn't be like how he was towards Jiaoji, where he could destroy a country and kill people at will. If he didn't use such extreme methods, it would take too much effort and time to solve the great Ming Empire's problem. With the idea of easy first and difficult later, Yang Qindong decided to put the great Ming Empire's problem aside for now. As long as he was strong enough, he believed that one day he would be able to subdue the enemy without fighting. Since that was the case, he couldn't fall out with them. In other words, he really had to borrow money. Of course, lending money to the great Ming Empire wasn't all bad. For example, He could use this opportunity to raise some conditions. What did the great Ming Empire have the most? Naturally, it was the Han population. If he could use this to make a deal, Zhu Qizhen would definitely agree. If a large number of people could be used in an open and above-board manner, it would play a very positive role in accelerating the development of Crimson Castle, the entire Ryukyu Island, and even the entire Yang family's development. That was not something that could be achieved with just a few silver taels. In other words, the thing that Yang Chendong didn't lack the most right now was money. Putting aside the fact that the goods in the Outer Heavens Trading Company had always been in short supply, especially after the cooperation with the Walla, many things had begun to be exported to Europe and had become items that the rich people there fought to buy. Just based on this, silver was continuously sent to the Yang clan. Moreover, as the Yang clan's navy continued to grow stronger, the amount of transactions at sea was also increasing. In the warehouse in Crimson City, silver had long been piled up like a mountain. There was so much that he didn't even know how to spend it. If there was a chance in the future, Yang Chendong would consider using his own banknotes. After all, using silver as currency was somewhat wasteful. Just the silver itself would be consumed. Even with the assistance of the Yang clan's bank, the Yang clan's bank didn't exist everywhere. Banknotes weren't good for real circulation, but it would be much better if he could use banknotes instead. Of course, this was just an idea. There was still a lot of preparation work to be done. If it was done, the silver would be so much that he wouldn't be able to spend it all. He could lend it to the great Ming Empire in exchange for a sufficient number of people. No matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. After having a rough idea in his mind, Yang Chendong put this matter aside. Since the person who was talking about this matter was the eunuch who came to announce the edict, it would take a long time for them to reach him. For now, it was more important to solve the problem of Jiaoji. Speaking of the problem of Jiaoji, Beta Persei, who was guarding outside the door, strode into the tent. When he saw Yang Chendong, he cupped his fists and said, "Young master, someone from Jiaoji is here. He says that he must see you." Let him in." Yang Chendong's face was calm. This was within his expectations. After all, it was reasonable for them to send someone to negotiate when the enemy was about to arrive at the city gates. However, he didn't know what the other party would say. Beta Persei left and quickly returned to the tent, bringing in a man in his 30s. When the man entered the tent, he first sized up Yang Chendong. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Then he imitated the Han people and cupped his fists and said, "The Crown Prince of Jiaoji, Li Yuanlong, greets the great Ming Empire's Duke of Loyalty." You're the Crown Prince of Jiaoji." When Tiger's Mane heard his name, he was shocked. Even Yang Chendong's eyes darkened. However, they quickly returned to normal. He didn't know how many enemies and countries he would have to face in the future. It was just a small crown prince of Jiaoji. He was very satisfied with Tiger's Mane's performance. Li Yuanlong nodded and said confidently, "That's right, I'm the crown prince of Jiaoji." The battle during the day had already proven the strength of the mercenaries. Everyone knew that if this battle were to continue, it was very likely that the Jiaoji army would be the one to lose. Imagine, how could you hurt your opponent when you couldn't even touch their body? If you lost on the battlefield, you had no choice but to negotiate. Although you might have to pay a high price, it was still better than being defeated or even killed. However, who would be sent to negotiate with Yang Chendong became a headache for King Li. Instead of calling it a negotiation, it would be more accurate to call it a truce. Naturally, the ministers were unwilling to do such a task. On the other hand, some courageous young ministers wanted to seize the opportunity. However, their status was too low. Not only would they be looked down upon during the negotiation, they wouldn't be able to make the decision on many matters. In the end, after much consideration, King Li Li's gaze fell on his son. Whether it was in terms of status or charisma, this son of the crown prince was the best choice. In fact, Li Yuanlong didn't disappoint his father. When he saw his father looking at him, he took the initiative to stand up and take on the responsibility. That was why he appeared in the mercenaries' tent. "You're quite brave." Tiger's mane was still in shock. Of course, this was said by Yang Qindong. This couldn't be blamed on Tiger's mane. In the past, he was just a study companion of the sixth young master. To put it bluntly, he was just a servant of the Yang family. With such a status, it was inevitable that he would feel uneasy when meeting the crown prince of a country. On the other hand, Yang Qindong had interacted with the northern and southern emperors of the great Ming dynasty. Naturally, his horizons were broader. Although he was a little flustered by Tiger's mane's appearance, he quickly calmed down. Chapter 526. That was because Yang Qindong knew that with his current status and advantage, the crown prince of Jiaoji was nothing to him. When Li Yuanlong saw how quickly Yang Qindong regained his composure, he sighed inwardly. Yang Qindong was both young and extraordinary. He put aside his shock at Yang Qindong's youth and said with a smile, "As the ancients say, when two armies fight, they don't kill the envoys. Besides, I have no grievances with the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. What use is there for you to take this crown prince's head? Why bother being an evil person, right?" On the surface, he pretended to be indifferent, but the words that came out of his mouth betrayed him. He was afraid that Yang Qindong would really do something to him. So he first explained some principles, saying that if Yang Qindong targeted him, the consequences would be more harmful than beneficial. Naturally, Yang Qindong understood the meaning behind Li Yuanlong's words and couldn't help but smile. Indeed, he didn't have any thoughts about the crown prince's life, so he wouldn't kill him. However, since Li Yuanlong had appeared in front of him so openly, it wouldn't be in line with Yang Qindong's character if he were to let him be too complacent. Therefore, Li Yuanlong smiled and said with a stern expression, "You don't deserve to address yourself as the crown prince in front of me. If there is a next time, you will be severely punished." When Li Yuanlong saw the smile on Yang Qindong's face, he thought that his words had struck a chord with Yang Qindong. Who would have thought that Li Yuanlong would suddenly fall out with him? Li Yuanlong then realized that he was indeed a little too comfortable just now. He immediately cupped his fists and said, "Yes, I am too used to addressing myself as the crown prince. It is my fault." With one sentence, Li Yuanlong, who had lowered his head, had already expressed his attitude and position. That was, he was really afraid of death and Yang Qindong's anger. Li Yuanlong was so cooperative and put his identity so low, which made Yang Qindong have a new level of respect for him. If this person was incomparably arrogant, even if he didn't kill him, he would humiliate him properly or even scare him a little to make him lose face. But since the other party was so low-key, he couldn't be too forceful. Bullying a person who didn't dare to fight back was really not fun. "All right, since you're here, take a seat. Tiger's mane, go out and keep an eye on them. No one is to disturb them without orders." Yang Qindong said casually to Tiger's mane. He wanted to see how sincere the crown prince of Jiaoji was. Tiger's mane originally wanted to stay and protect the young master. However, when he thought of the young master's true strength, he knew that he was unnecessary. He immediately nodded and left. Perhaps it was because of his rebirth, but Yang Qindong had become familiar with his body. His body's potential began to explode. His strength, speed, spear skills, and perception were stronger than when he was at his peak in his previous life. Just a few days ago, when he was bored in Hanoi City, he called the 20 people from the 2nd Guard team and asked them to attack him together. To everyone's surprise, the final winner turned out to be Yang Qindong himself. Although he had taken a lot of punches and kicks, because of this, he was the one standing in the end. Even the punches and kicks that he took quickly returned to normal as he continued to breathe in and out. This was all because of the qi that suddenly appeared in his body. Yang Qindong didn't have any impression of how this qi was formed and when it appeared. Anyway, he knew that with this qi in his body, his strength had more than doubled, and this strength was still increasing. This time, he challenged the second guard team. Next time, he would challenge the first guard team. He wanted to see where his limit was. Tiger's Mane, who had been by Yang Qindong's side for a long time, was very clear about these things. The young master was so strong that he was even a little abnormal. What was so scary about leaving him and the crown prince of Jiaoji alone in the tent? It would be best if this person didn't have any bad intentions. Otherwise, he would really be in trouble. Tiger's Mane left without any hesitation. When only the two of them were left in the tent, Li Yuanlong stood up and bowed to Yang Qindong. He said, "Yuanlong thanks the Duke of Loyalty." This gratitude was naturally to thank Yang Qindong for saving his face. Otherwise, if there were outsiders present, it would be hard for him, the crown prince, to lower his head. That's enough. There are no outsiders here. Why don't you tell me what you want? Yang Qindong had no intention of building a relationship with Li Yuanlong. Although he was the crown prince of a country, in Yang Qindong's eyes, he was just a defeated general. Since he was a defeated general, his status naturally didn't matter. Phew! Li Yuanlong heaved a sigh of relief and sat back down on his chair. His mind quickly went through the main points of the negotiation. When he raised his head again, he opened his mouth and said, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the strength of the mercenary army is something that my father and I, as well as all of the Jiaoji officials, have witnessed clearly. We admit that if we were to fight, we would be no match for you. That's why I only have one goal in mind, and that is to ask the Duke of Loyalty to withdraw your troops. As for the price, please state it clearly. As long as it is within our means, we will do our best to satisfy you. How about it? It's not that you would be no match for us in a fight. It's that you wouldn't even be a match for us." Yang Qindong corrected Li Yuanlong's words. Then he ignored Li Yuanlong's ugly expression and continued, "It's impossible for me to withdraw my troops." "What do you think? You can either surrender, and you and your father can still live a good life. Of course, you won't have any power. Or you can choose another path. Tomorrow morning, my mercenary army will attack the city. When that time comes, all of you will die without a burial place." Yang Qindong stared into Li Yuanlong's eyes and said seriously, at this moment, he definitely wouldn't give Li Yuanlong any hope or expectation. This was something that couldn't be changed from the first sentence he said. Seeing Yang Qindong's seriousness, Li Yuanlong knew that there was no way out. However, he could never agree to such a condition. He even wanted to stand up and yell at Yang Qindong at the moment. It was simply impossible. However, such a thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. He couldn't take his life as a joke. Although he was indeed happy to roar like that once he angered Yang Qindong, he was afraid that his little life would be left here. This was not what he wanted to see at all. "All right, this is a serious matter. I want to go back and discuss it with my father." Li Yuanlong took a step back and said he didn't want to negotiate anymore. He just wanted to return to Shiyu City first. "Sure." Yang Qindong nodded. This answer surprised Li Yuanlong. "I can even give you a warning. If you don't give me an accurate answer by noon tomorrow, I will attack the city. When that time comes, you won't have a choice." You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.